What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the BizDad podcast recap episode. Today, I am super thrilled to have the guest backgrounds for all of the amazing guests that I had this year. I'm thrilled to just show you guys a little bit of a window into each and every person that I had on the podcast this year. It was an amazing year with some great interviews. So please enjoy this recap. If you see anybody that you really want to watch the full episode of, jump back in. Take a look at it, listen to the full episode. You'll be thrilled that you did. Like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. But please enjoy your Christmas, enjoy your New Year's, and we'll see you guys in the next year. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the BizDad podcast. Today, I am super excited to chat with Darren Light, a good buddy of mine, a business partner of mine on our very first apartment deal, our large deal. And I'm really looking forward to digging into a little bit more of the personal side from you that I haven't probably gathered as much on. But Darren, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us about who you are, tell us about your family, and tell us about your business.
Thanks, Adam. It's great to be with you. Yeah, started in real estate in 2016. I'll back up a little bit further. I was married 20 plus years, and I have two grown children currently, son and daughter. My daughter's 29. My son is 24. My wife now and I, Penny, we have two grandchildren from my daughter, almost 4-year-old granddaughter and almost 10 months old grandson. Grew up with divorced parents, so never thought that would happen to me. You never planned for that to happen. Went to school right out of high school. Thought I was going to be a football coach and a teacher because that was ingrained to me. Football was my life. Got to play Division III football, which was a blessing. We ended up not teaching. Met my future wife at that point while I was still in school. Finished my mechanical engineering degree, got out. And we didn't have a family, though, till about 6 years down the road. We were great as parents. We just weren't great as husband and wife at that time. So let's fast forward to 2016. I was already divorced 6 years at that point. I'm in my early 40s at that point. Knew that I did not want to work for another person for the rest of my life.
I want to rewind a little bit just to gather some information about who Darren is, where you came from. I like to preface this almost on every call that I like to ask about our dads and even our dads' dads to really understand where we come from. It wasn't until I was in my early 30s before I really understood who my dad was that made me realize where I came from and how blessed I was to have the dad I did, because while none of us come with a tool chest full of tools for being a dad, like he came with a very empty tool chest because his dad was not the best example for him. But I love to learn more about dads. And I think in our communication we've had before, you're pretty close to your dad. It means something to you. You've had some of those thoughts already. So I'd love to dig into what was it like when you were a kid growing up with your dad? Where did he come from? What was it like for you growing up? And what was it like for him even growing up? As much about that.
Yeah, my dad grew up one of 5 children in Northeast Tennessee. He was into sports, almost every sport there was, did a lot of hunting, and worked on a farm where his family lived. His father was a hardcore disciplinarian. His dad died in 1996 at the age of 74. He had a mental breakdown when he was maybe around 60 years of age, maybe in his late 50s. And I'll just go ahead and go into the story. His father tried to kill his mother, actually shot her. And I believe my father was one of the people that were there, and one of his brothers stopped any further actions. But from that day forward, my grandmother never pressed charges, loved him till the day he died, knew that it was something wrong mentally, whether it was a chemical imbalance, whatever it was, and don't know what the stressors were all in his life at that point that made that happen. But that affected my dad as far as the incident itself. Not necessarily down the road with any mental aspect at all or whatnot, but he was on medication the rest of his life just to keep his nerves calm. You could have a conversation with him, but he did not talk a lot at that point. He still would go to work. He worked at Eastman Chemical Company, Kodak in Kingsport, Tennessee, retired from there as a welder. And he still drove, but he never went to church with my grandmother. In his later years, actually 3 or 4 years before his death, he did attend church with my grandmother almost every Sunday. So that was a blessing in itself at that point in time. But he was not very conversational. He was, I think, due to the medication. And one of his favorite things to do with the grandchildren was play checkers. Mm-hmm. And he always won. You could never beat him. I don't care if you were in your team. It didn't matter. You would never beat him. I'm sitting in the living room with him. He's in his recliner that he sat in the same chair for years. And I'm sitting on the couch. I believe we were watching television, maybe a football game. and we're not really talking. My grandmother walks through the living room to get to the other part of the house from her bedroom area to the kitchen or something. And my grandmother's one of those short women, grew up rough, and she had on her apron that she always wore when she was doing chores around the house or cooking or washing clothes or whatnot. And he says something to her, and I don't remember what he said. And she turned around and stopped in her tracks and looked at him. And I don't remember what she said. Basically, he snapped at her and she snapped at him just for what he said. And he looked at me after she walked out of the room, and he had this sly grin on his face. He just turned his head and looked towards me, and he had this sly grin on his face, and he looked at me. I had no idea what he was going to say. He said, sometimes you just got to jerk their chain. And I thought that was hilarious, but I did not laugh out loud. But he thought it was hilarious. And so that's probably one of the most vivid moments that I have of my grandfather. And that story gets told often amongst my cousins and my dad and things of that nature. My dad played, as we've had this discussion, has always played golf. My dad threw ball with me, baseball, played football with me, supported me in whatever sport I was in from the time I could throw a ball at all till I graduated college. My dad was very strict. My dad grew up very conservative, being you didn't even burp in front of your family. You didn't even fart in front of your family. That's how he was raised. To this day, this is the way it is. So when my parents divorced, I was around 8 or 9 years old. We still spent our regular time with him. My mother moved across town. And to this day, I always had a great relationship with my dad. And it was my sister and I just have one other sibling. She's 3 years younger than I. I think my dad had a harder time relating to my sister. And I think just because of her being female, he didn't really know how to relate. She would tell you that to this day, but they are very close now. But in my eyes, even as a little kid, high school, playing ball, being at college, playing ball, he's my hero. And the time that he spent with me playing sports, doing whatever, but not really from a spiritual aspect, because I did not get that from my father. I don't remember going to church with my dad. To this day, we invite my dad and my stepmom to church often, and they just won't come. I know that he's a Christian, but I was always raised in church, no matter what household I was in. Grandparents, parents, it didn't matter. So that's been a blessing overall. I had other influential men in my life from the churches I grew up in that poured into me because my dad wasn't around. And so I got that from other men. It was fortunate that I did get that. Let's talk about my stepfather. My stepfather and my mom were married 40 years. He was quite a bit older. He was a Korean War veteran. He just passed a couple of years ago, almost 90 at the time. So while I inherited the closeness of a father and a hero status from my father, as I mentioned before, he was a CPA by trade, but my stepdad was a licensed electrician, Korean War veteran, licensed in HVAC repair, could build or do just about anything with his hands. I learned how to use my hands from him. I learned how to use tools. I learned how to drive his 64 Ford utility bed truck with a 3 on the tree, and just things that my dad didn't know how to do. It's not that he didn't want to teach me. He just didn't know how to do it. And I'm fortunate that I've had both of them, and I've learned different things from them. My stepdad was the kind of guy that could break down a computer from scratch and just build it back and make it do something else, but just because he can. He worked at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory at some point back in the day. He worked at Square D. He worked at Mead Paperboard. A lot of different industries, had a lot of different skill sets as far as just being mechanically inclined. He was also a hard disciplinarian as well. So I didn't get up a lot of trouble growing up or in high school, not until I got to college when you got all this freedom. And I don't mean trouble. I just mean doing things that you hadn't done growing up, drinking and whatnot, carrying on. I've had two, I guess I've been fortunate to have two, and still my real father in my life as positive influences. But those influences were different types of influences, if you will.
What would you say as a 9-year-old boy, like when that happened, you're, for lack of better terms, like losing a full-time dad, because then it turns into kind of going back and forth to now getting two fathers. Like, how did that kind of play in your brain as you were growing up, as like back and forth between houses and like dad versus stepdad and all of that?
Yeah, my stepdad came, I say a couple of years later. We actually moved out of state at that time, and that was tough. I had a wonderful experience where we lived at the time. And I knew that I missed my dad, but I'll be honest with you, as a 9-year-old, I don't think I really understood what was going on. I just knew that when I would get to see him, I couldn't wait to see him. He would drive 5 hours when we moved out of state in North Alabama to see me play sports. And then that time during those 3 years we lived away was extremely difficult. And when I was around 12 or 13, I started to resent my mother. And the reason I started to resent her was she was one of these disciplinarians that it didn't matter where you were, public space or not. She wanted to discipline you with her hand if she could. And she yelled a lot. She had a short temper. She'd go off. She had a short fuse, if you will. I make the joke that she was an only child. My grandmother didn't want to have any more after that. I love my mother, don't get me wrong, but at that point, right or wrong, I started to resent her. There was a point in a 13, 14-ish where I begged my father to come stay with him, to live with him. And so I did. I came back to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. So if you grew up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, at any time period, all you ever wanted to do was play football for that high school. That's just what people did and knew it as. I can tell you without a doubt that was God's plan, because if I had continued to live with my mother and stepfather, I say it this way, don't know that this really would have happened, but I think I could have ended up in jail. When I came to live with my father, just he and he had not remarried at that time. It was years later until he remarried. He was incredibly strict. He basically told me, and I had buddies that had to get jobs in high school. I had buddies that were playing sports that had to get jobs as well. And he said, "You've got 2 jobs, make straight A's and play football." And I ate steak every night. So what did I have to complain about?
Yeah,
right?
no joke.
And he meant it. And that's what he did. That's how he provided. I learned how to do my laundry from my dad. I learned how to cook from my dad. I learned a lot of that as well from my grandmother, not my mother. Yeah, he remained my hero through those 3 difficult years being away. I did see him occasionally, but no regularly scheduled because we're literally 5-hour drive away in another state. And I don't know all the ins and outs and technicalities of how my mom arranged that and got him to agree. And I've never been told that, never asked. But the living experience overshadowed everything else there. It was small town America, had some great neighbors, had a great church, great schools, had a blast those 3 years of my life. I still talk to some of these people today that I grew up with in middle school in a different city. I think that overshadowed anything else that I might have been feeling at the time.
Okay. Yeah, I would imagine that those 3 years being separated would have been rough because you were already saying how close you were to your dad, and that's got to be tough. What do you think as you were growing older, right? Like you lived with your dad for a while, and as you grew up and started to realize the dynamic between your mom and your dad and all the separation stuff, what kind of self-analysis / analysis of your family have you done, or conversations you have that help you work through anything that you may have been holding on to, or maybe you're still holding on to be able to work through some of the thoughts and pain you may have experienced?
Yeah. When I realized that unfortunately divorce was on my horizon, possibly, it was not a done deal or nothing like that, I sat down with both of them separately and asked them reasons why it occurred. And a lot of what you're going after now is, what was your thinking? Did you think about this? Did you think about that? And I think at that point, I can tell you honestly, I don't even know if I really got the truth from either one of them, because I'm not going to blame either one of them at this point in my life, especially. There was some introspective that I needed to hear, and it helped me excuse why they might have been, why it may have occurred in their life, and still me have the ability to not have to hold anything against them. I've never played the victim mentality, if you will. You do need to understand, and don't get me wrong. So my son is very interested in psychiatry and is studying for his MCAT as we speak to go down that road. And he has encouraged me, even as late as a few months ago, and I've gone to therapy. I've talked to some counselors, even at this point late in my life, because I do think there's healing there. I don't think you're going to ever figure everything out, because you have to look at things with the perspective of, hey, I'm still blessed to be in the situation that I'm in. Look at my family that I've been able to raise. Look at my children that I've had gotten the privilege to raise. I have 2 great children. Did divorce hurt them? Absolutely. But where they are in their life now, my son and I in particular, we've gone through some counseling, which needed to happen. To his credit, he encouraged me to go down that road, or else I probably would not have done it. And I think there's the old adage, you wish you knew back then what you know now. Yeah, that's true. But I will say you are never too old. Never too old. I don't care what your number is chronologically. To change, to be a different person, to have a different outlook on life, or to go get some help, whether it's helping you or helping someone in your family. You're never too old to, and you, I think this happens in church a lot too. These 70, 80-year-old people that have been doing the same thing for years, even though they've been going to church their whole life, sometimes you'll hear them make comments that makes you think, God can still use you.
Oh yeah.
But you've got to allow him to use you. You're not just trying to get to the end. I can't stand that comment or that mentality, if you will, if that makes sense.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the BizDad podcast. Today, I am stoked to talk to Thomas Pfanner. Looking forward to chatting with him about his experience, about his business, especially, of course, about being a dad. Thomas, if you can, please go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us about your family, and then tell us about your business.
Yeah, name's Thomas Pfanner. My family, I've got a 2-year-old daughter, Leela, 4-year-old daughter, Maddie, and my 16-year-old son, Charles, and then my wonderful wife, Megan. We all live here in Central Oregon. And that intro we hear the intros about our family and what's on the surface, but beneath that, my son was born when I was 18 and a rough relationship with his mother. And so through the journey of fatherhood, my business is called Dads Who Lead. And it started because my son rebelled against my leadership when he was in 8th grade and walked out of my life for a period of time.
So tell me a little bit about what it was like for you growing up. Maybe some of the things you learned that you wanted to do, things you learned that you didn't want to do from your dad, maybe even your dad's dad. Maybe you saw something in the lineage. So talk to me a little bit about what it was like for you growing up with your dad.
Sure. So I appreciate that you asked about lineage. My grandfather on my dad's side passed away before I was born. So I never knew him at all other than what I've heard from my dad. And he was a professor at Oregon State. And I believe he was in the Pacific in World War II. And my dad always felt pressure from him to be a good student. And from what my dad said, he never felt like he was a good student. But he did enough to get by. As far as the way that I was brought up, a really powerful part of our family story is that before I was born, actually, almost eerily, 8 or 9 months before I was born, I had a brother who drowned at the age of 18. And so my parents they lost, but right after they had lost this child, they found out they were going to be having me. And we have a yours, mine, and ours family. So my mom had 2 kids coming into the marriage, and my dad had 2 kids coming into the marriage. And I was 9 years younger than everybody else, at least like 9 to 15 years younger. So I really feel like my parents did everything they could, and it was important for them to create. There are things that my dad taught me that were in his wheelhouse of teaching me how to sail, teaching me how to throw baseball and football. But I do believe there was definitely some playing not to lose as far as the way that I was brought up. They're like, all right, let's not mess this up. Let's make sure he stays safe. I didn't learn to ride a bike until I was in 6th grade. I didn't learn to swim until I was 10 or 11 years old. And so there were elements of the freedom that were held back. Like it's a lot different than the way that I want to raise my kids of really focus, like Dad to Lee, we talk a lot about skill development and how we can develop those skills with our kids. So growing up, I was like a latchkey kid. I was home a lot by myself, and very soon they're like, oh, Thomas is really independent. He can take care of himself really well. So we'll just let him be. And yeah, going through high school, it was like, oh, Thomas gets home. He does his homework, plays football or does whatever sport I was doing, and like self-manages himself. And so they just let me do my thing, which I'm grateful for. But there's also some, especially when I was younger, like 0 to 10, that I wish in a lot of ways I would have been pushed. Like, we're going to get you into more sports teams. We're going to get you like more skill development with whether it's learn to ride a bike or speaking Spanish, something more than just what's being done in school.
I am super excited to talk to another GoBundance brother, Lance Knaub. Lance, if you can, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us about your family and your business.
Sure. First of all, Adam, thank you for having me. I'm excited and scared all at the same time to be here. And for everyone listening, be sure to like and follow and subscribe. Adam's leadership is off the charts. Him and I were together last at a conference in Stowe, Vermont, and he's a massive presence in the room. So excited to be here. And yeah, talking about family is going to be fun because, probably don't have enough opportunity to reflect on our families. And especially as entrepreneurs, definitely that's part of my journey, right? Having made a lot of sacrifices in too little time at periods for family. And similar to you, having made some changes to do way better. I started my immediate family and just directions. My wife, Jody, we're coming up on our 20-year wedding anniversary. May 21st. I don't know when this will go live.
Nice.
Next week. And we've been together for 27 years. We pretty much had a fairy tale meeting. We studied abroad for physical therapy, which they call physiotherapy in the UK. She was the class behind me, and we both ended up spring break together in the Algarve, Portugal. That's where I first had some sparks. So that's my wife, Jody. We got 3 amazing children. Our oldest is Sage, 17-year-old. Our son, Armstrong, is 15. And our daughter, Sierra, is 13. And they're all, going well. A lot of exciting things going on. So I grew up in Pennsylvania. My parents are both living still in York, Pennsylvania, South Central Pennsylvania. My mother is Mimi and my father is John. Father is trained as a heating and air conditioning. He was also served in the Army and then he trained in HVAC, did his apprenticeship at York International and stayed in the industry. Never really wanted to manage people, but just loved doing commercial heating and air conditioning. My mom is trained as a beautician and she is tough. She got diagnosed with MS shortly after I was born. And, they both come from big families and I'm an only child. Sad. And my dad's wanted. My dad, when my dad got out of the Army, he bought a 40-acre farm with a little beat down house, and him and his other 6 brothers renovated the house. And my dad operated the farm and evenings and weekends. We had pigs and sheep and chickens. Pretty amazing that he could do all this evenings and weekends. And that was fun for me. Certainly tractors and Brawner and taking care of animals at a young age. Learned a lot of lessons. Didn't realize how good I had it, really. Right? Everyone right now, even our people want to go Barr. So many people are trying to get back to self-sustainable living and they realize how good it was. So those are the people in my immediate family. Jody and I are both physical therapists. And when I graduated in 1998, I worked for a few years. And then after a couple of years, I realized that I thought physical therapy could be done better. Jody and I wanted to uniquely bring physical therapy and fitness together to serve clients better.
Obviously, you told us a little bit about your dad already, but let's dig into that a little bit more. Tell me what it was like growing up, who your dad was, what you know about his background, maybe even what you know about his dad and what it was like for him growing up.
Sure. Yeah. So interesting story because the my dad has a German background and my mom's Italian. So the Germans are I'll start with the Italians. Italians are very loving and ugly and affectionate. And the Germans are my Knaub family get-togethers, we like shake hands, if anything. And it's hard to get the information and the stories out at times. But at my dad's 80th birthday party 2 years ago, he was telling a whole lot of stories, and we're really trying to get more information out. His family was in the city of York and in a row house they grew up. And my dad's mother actually passed away having what would have been the 10th child. These 9 children were almost all put up for foster homes. Luckily, my great aunt Teresa and some family pulled together, and my grandfather, who I never met, because my dad was young so I never met my grandparents on that side. And so my dad was the second sibling. So my Uncle Pete and him really had to do a lot for the family. And so my grandfather, my dad's father, who I never met, continued the work, and between my Aunt Teresa and a little bit of home help in the house, were able to, earn a living. And they had apparently a rental unit. Maybe the garage in the alley street or something to bring in a little extra revenue to try to make ends meet. So it was pretty rough. And you had 7 boys and 2 girls. God bless. I had my Aunt Fran and my Aunt Sis. And apparently they did pick up a lot of slack, as you can imagine, and probably did more than their fair share of housekeeping. But yeah, these guys were like a gang, apparently. Heard stories.
I could see that.
Charlie Braun, who became my barber in New York, and a lot of stories over the years. So yeah, they were in the city, but they all did well and very close knit, because our family with 9, we've got a big family, the 9 siblings and all their children. Both sides of my family had 40 first cousins. My wife was like, whoa, at our wedding, she's a big family. Because even now, the Knaub family, we need to do better at getting together more often. So that was a little bit of my dad's kind of city childhood and what I know.
As a farm field in North Dakota, that's what you do. But so what did he do as he was growing up and then getting married? Tell me how that kind of all came to be, and then what it was like for you growing up with him as your dad.
My dad was obviously very handy. He was a mechanic in the Army. He was busy around the farm. And we even built an addition on the farmhouse. And so he was teaching me handy things, although I resisted that. I didn't really become skilled and didn't really. And yeah, some of my best memories of playing basketball together. My son's at that age, right? He's definitely freshman, faster and stronger, way younger at that tipping point for sure. I enjoyed playing some basketball together, but yeah, I can remember going to church, and on Sundays after church, there would be this school for boys, this reform school for boys. So even though I grew up in Spring Grove, I was exposed to some diversity, and my dad he's a super high character and straight-laced. And we would go to the school and play basketball with people from all over. That was a lot of fun, and definitely some of my best memories. Just really, because basketball became something I loved and still play to this day. I have a lot of good memories about playing basketball with my dad. In summer times, when people would come to visit us, I was just from California coming in, and my dad would give them rides on the tractor, so maybe riding the ponies, and it was just a whole new experience. And I didn't go to summer camps. It was just like, okay, at that time growing up, it was just like, okay, go play. And for me, even just to round up a handful of friends, it would be a walk or ride my bike for miles. And of course, at that time, it was normal not to really know. We had a lot of freedom.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, my dad was working full time during the day, come home and do all the things needed to take care of a farm and garden, all those types of animals. And we watched some sports at night, and we would I remember a lot of dinners together, which was not easy and challenge in today's world. So that was good. And I went to school once, during basketball season and whatnot, I went to school in the city of York where my dad grew up at St. Rosalima. So it was a 30-minute drive consecutively, but when I took the school bus, it could take an hour and a half, hour 45, 2 hours. So it was a big commute. So yeah, some great memories with my dad. I wish I I totally regret not learning more of the handy and mechanical skills that he really wanted to teach me more.
Mm-hmm. What is it that you think that made you resist that?
I think it was me. Maybe a part of it was to be different and be me. Some age, I can remember not feeling great about that. It's an insecurity about it. I don't know if it was that or not, but certainly that came into play at some time, being different and not confidence, to love that and to welcome that.
I'm going to go back to your story a little bit, right? So growing up, how did you get to decide to go to physical therapy school? Growing up on a farm, going to a Catholic school, or it sounded like Catholic school, St. Mary's. How did you then go, you know what? Physical therapy sounds great. How did that kind of go through?
Yeah. And I guess just to balance things out, I'll just mention quickly about my mom's side of the family a little bit. And unless you want to touch on that later, but my mom's
No, go for it.
parents, I was lucky enough to grow up with them. And my grandparents were native Italian speakers. And my grandfather came over from Sicily, like on the boat, literally on the boat when he was probably 17. He was illiterate. So he worked in American Chain was the company in New York. He also lived in a row house in New York City. And he apparently was offered promotions, but when they found out he was illiterate, he couldn't take them. So he worked his entire career and had traditional retirement. But we were very close because I lived in New York. So my cousins that had moved out to California and whatnot didn't have the bonding time. So my grandfather and my grandmother, Mela, she was an Italian speaker, but she was born in New York. And grandfather and grandmother, they took the songs all day long. So I would come home during basketball season, at least walk to their house after school. A good meal, relax down, enjoy time with them, do some homework, go to basketball practice, and on to spring break. So I had pretty amazing grandparents with all that Italian culture and the good food and the love and the warmth. Very strong personalities as well. Passion and definitely some heated conversations. And that was my grandparents on my mom's side. Yeah, my mom, similar to my dad, didn't go to college and studied to be a beautician. And that was her career path, right? I mentioned she got multiple sclerosis, MS. She continued to try to really, I remember having vision problems as a child, which was scary. It's just like some really motor signs, symptoms, just like some things and anxiety attacks in the car. So she was brave and fearless and continued to try to be a beautician part-time to really have a career as well. So neat lady, darn lady, and lucky to have my parents still. To answer your question, over time, even though I didn't want to learn hands-on work exactly the way my dad did it, I knew I wanted to help people and being involved in healthcare. I thought I wanted to be a pharmacist. And I went to a little bit of overconfidence because I accepted every pharmacy school I applied to. And I went to Rutgers. And I realized and remembered I didn't like chemistry.
That's needed. That's a necessary tool there.
Yeah. So between not liking chemistry and being 17 and having a lot of freedom for the first time, I definitely didn't start off on a great track. Once I became focused and was exposed to physical therapy, then I really got a program overseas. And I really was just trying to open my mind to the world. It seemed like the best of both things because I hadn't traveled that much as a child.
Yep.
My mom sent me away with my Uncle Frank sometimes. They went down to South Carolina to Hilton Head and was lucky to have a few trips like that, but really not any regular, consistent vacations with my mom and dad. So really wanted to see the world and travel. So it was a great opportunity to do both and lived and studied for 2.5 years in Aberdeen, Scotland. Pretty amazing.
We have got some kiddos on the show today, starting us off. We got Rourke on my shoulders, Adam behind me. We have Wyatt hanging over with Matt Brawner, who I'm looking forward to getting to know a little bit more today. But Matt, if you can, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us about you. Tell us about your family and your business.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Matt Brawner, based up just north of the Twin Cities in Laney, Minnesota. I have here my oldest son, Wyatt. On my team, we have my wife, Mandy, and then we've got 3 girls after Wyatt. So Wyatt's the oldest of 4.
Boy.
We have Nell, Sawyer, and then little Lano showed up just this past November. So she is 6 months, and will let us know that she's here, wants to be a part of the conversation.
Of course.
I work full time in real estate. Started out buying townhouses. Wish I could tell people, I say this a lot, that I'm so smart, I have this all planned out, but I didn't. I actually, just we can get into it as part of my story. I needed friends, and there were guys that were buying townhouses together. So I'll do that. That's a good way to meet people here. One townhouse turned into another. Now I'm operate multifamily properties in and around the Twin Cities and throughout the Southeast United States.
Awesome. That's sometimes the best laid plans are plans that weren't plans at all. However
Right.
it goes, and as long as you're enjoying it, it doesn't matter. Speaking of plans that weren't plans, let's go ahead and start at the very beginning of who Matt was, because like you weren't planning to be a real estate investor and a father of 4 when you were growing up. Talk to me a little bit about, I love to dig into the history of who we are. Something I did not tell you. The very first person I interviewed on this podcast was my dad, because I wanted people to know who my dad was, where I come from. And it's just one of the reasons I love to ask other people about their dads. Some stories are horrendous. Some stories are wonderful, and a little bit of mix in between, of course. But our dads, our parents as a whole, but of course, this is focusing on the dad side of the house with this podcast. Our dads tend to really lay the tracks in one way, shape, or form for what we do as we grow up. Maybe we do exactly what they did. Maybe we do nothing like what they did because we want to run away from what we saw. But if we can, let's dig into a little bit of your history. Tell us about your dad, maybe even your dad's dad, if you know much about him.
Omaha, Nebraska. My dad is still living. His name is Lee Brawner. My grandpa Jack, he passed back in 2018 there. And I'm really excited to key in on fathers because it's something that we work really hard on in our house. Can't talk about this without talking about my faith. I really believe that your earthly father is really important because as a child, that's the first person. I wish I could say it the right person. These aren't my thoughts, but as a child, that's the first person I think you meet that you realize has a choice whether or not they live. Right? Yeah. Your mom, there's people with horrible stories out there. I'm like, your mom carried you. Like, you're having kind of an instant connection there. But your dad is the first person that you meet. Like, oh, do you accept me? Do you love me? I think that's why father wounds can be so hurtful when they do happen there. We focus a lot on that because our goal is to align our kids with their heavenly father so that they can spend eternity with him. My dad, growing up in Omaha, Nebraska, he and I are very different in terms of our views of the world and our hobbies. A lot of that's driven by my dad's health problems when he was growing up and when I was growing up, Dad, that we thought we were going to lose him 3 times, had cancer, had some really rare autoimmune diseases, and that just really limited what he could do physically as a father. Interestingly enough, since he's now in his late 70s, he's probably as healthy as he has ever been. But that just really put him in a different position. The way my dad could fight and love our family was just to simply keep going and to keep living there. He worked as an attorney for the state of Nebraska. I like that because it was nothing glamorous. What my dad could do was be present, get up every day and go to work. And that's what he did for 40 plus years. We had some ups and downs as a family. My dad was constant through that. And I think I respect him more and more, even though we do see the world a little bit differently, whether that's anything or things or what we view politically. I have come to appreciate him more as a dad as I've gotten to be a dad. My grandfather, neat guy in terms of his background. He actually worked in meatpacking plants. He was drafted in World War II, didn't serve overseas, went and taught himself how to write. So he became a newspaper writer. And then somebody with no college education who just simply was that passionate mindset in terms of how he led and provided for his family. So a guy who didn't graduate from college was able to leave his wife and family extraordinarily comfortable just by doing the little right things over time. He and my grandmother living in Omaha. I heard about this guy, Warren Buffett. I thought he was really good, nice guy. And so they invested some money with him.
Nice.
Their story.
I suppose that was a moderately good idea.
It was my grandma who worked as a cafeteria lady who was just, she thought Warren Buffett was a nice man. So I think the stock was trading $10,000 a share when they bought one. My grandpa didn't want to do it initially. That's like there.
Yeah. Well done, Grandma.
Yeah, well done, Grandma. And I like to believe I'm a Western guy. Art spent time down in Texas. Wyatt will tell you quickly that's where he was born. My wife's in-laws still live in Texas. We thought we were to have a big pool.
Nice.
And you like to go to
and you do knee boarding there? That's cool.
Yeah. We were living just outside of Austin, Texas. Bought a house. That's not where I ever thought I was going to spend the rest of my life. But I was traveling all over the place. Really felt called to worship all in the same spot. So came to Minnesota to run our real estate company.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. That for me, travel with the family is like one of my favorite things to do ever. My wife and I were just talking about that last night about where our next travels are going to be and how we want to be able to do it and never let it stop. Anytime I talk to a dad who's passionate about traveling and seeing the kiddos want to do it with them, that's phenomenal. Hey, Wyatt, have you ever been to any other countries? Have you done that yet?
Like countries? No, but I have been to see.
You've been in other states? Okay, very good. Awesome.
Yeah, Tennessee. Nebraska lots of times.
Yeah.
And
We went saw Indiana. We went to Massachusetts, New Hampshire, where Jen's Lake House is at, Vermont. And then we saw Uncle Andrew get married. You got to see upstate New York. That was pretty.
Upstate New York is beautiful. I graduated high school in upstate New York. I love it up there. So, where at in upstate you go?
We're in Syracuse. My brother just accepted a position at Colgate. He lives in Hamilton, New York now. His twin, he was 4 boys. His twin lives in New York City. And then,
I'm sorry.
The aunt he's talking about, she has a home in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. It was a really amazing trip for us because my whole experience with New England was New York City and Boston. Maybe more of that.
Yeah.
I get up there, I'm like, okay, now I see what people are talking about. So,
yeah, I graduated high school right outside of Syracuse. I've got a buddy of mine getting ready to. He's just retired from the Syracuse Police Department, and so I'm very familiar with that whole area up there. I love it up there. If I could avoid all of the politics of the city, which you can't because everything that happens in the city affects the rest of the state, then I would think about going back there or at least having property up there. But I can't. I've completely cut ties other than my sisters. Like, they're still in my life. But other than that, I ain't playing around. But as you were growing up, what would you say? So like you, as the older I get, the more I understand about my father and how he chose to father me. And so I can understand more about him. As you were growing up, what were some of the feelings that you had about your dad that maybe A, you confirmed later on, or B, you realized were completely just like way off base?
What was way off base? Because that also that's what I focus on. I didn't grow up in a home where physically knew how to do a lot of things with my hands. Didn't grow up in a home where there was a lot of intentional masculine direction for us, where I was, were a hobby specifically for young boys. They don't play sports, right? But the opportunity to be outdoors, to be active outdoors. And that was something I always felt was lacking. It's something that I was drawn to as a dad, because I do believe that God gifts men in certain ways, and there's ways that men bond with one another. And I'm trying to encourage my son, right? I didn't grow up with any appreciation for firearms. Right? I was scared of them. And so Wyatt and I spend time now learning to shoot so that we can respect firearms. We're blessed to hold pretty hand with our saying, we can hunt. Didn't do any of that. And I wish I would have, because there's so many things that you can connect to scripture and just connect to one another that way. And so Wyatt's learning how to shoot archery.
Nice.
I say it comes full circle, and I think it shapes the way I think about things, because 2 things can be true. I do feel like that was a part that was missed, but I had some anger for a long time, the way I was raised, and I've just come around to giving grace. My parents raised 4 kids. My dad was incredibly sick on and off. Truly almost lost him numerous times. He physically couldn't do things, and that wasn't his fault. He had things that were robbed from him, frankly, even before I was born, he had cancer. And then mom had to work full time outside the home just because so that we could all have good insurance so that she could provide and pay the bills. There, mom got hurt. She was a special education teacher for 40 years. She had a student punch her in the face, and that happened multiple times. But this time she wasn't ready and did what's called a contre coup, or brain bounced. And then 2 weeks later, she was administering a test. She fell off, face planted on the floor, and she's dealing with Parkinson's and everything from the singular event that happened back in February of 1997. And so I just really limited them, trying to raise 4 kids on public employee salary at a time when one of them wasn't working. I just come back around to giving more grace there, while at the same time pursuing things that I think are really important for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that as we're growing older, we start to really put that perspective to how we grew up. Not everybody does put that perspective to it, right? Doesn't look back. They look back still with that disdain and that anger in their heart, as opposed to realizing what was going on. And that was something that I strongly encourage on almost every podcast, is for folks to look back. It's again why I ask these questions, is if somebody's listening and they haven't looked back at how they were raised, to go, you know what? Like, my parents had a lot more going on than I saw at the time. Because despite the fact that at 16-year-old boys, we know everything. Despite how we know everything, we were completely oblivious to everything that was going on, because you realize you knew absolutely nothing. And to step back and realize what it is, I think it's freeing for both you and your parents, and especially if you talk to your parents about it and say, hey, man, you guys did such an amazing job. And I try to tell that to my dad all the time. For where he came from, he did an amazing job. And I don't want it to come across as, oh, you did okay for what you're doing. But no. That's like saying, oh yeah, you're really pretty for your age. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is I understand that, like, you came from a very terrible place, and to have turned out the way you did and to raise me the way you did, I'm impressed. So good on you for realizing that and putting it to action, because I think that's too many dads, thankfully not most of them that I talk to on here, but I'm hoping that some of them that are listening will, if they're like this, they adjust, is they just go down the same exact path their parents were. My dad wasn't involved with me, so I'm just not going to be involved with my kids. Or my dad beat me, so I'm going to beat my kids. Or my dad did this, so I'm going to do this. And they don't even think about it in those terms. They just walk down the same path that their parents did, because that's just what they saw. I am super thrilled to talk to John Laney, a fellow military veteran. Tell us about your family and tell us about your business.
Yeah, Adam. Hey, thanks for inviting me on. Pleasure to talk. Yeah, shoot, where do I start? So I got out of the Navy in 2020, 4 years ago. And I had, before I got out of the Navy, I had this vision that wouldn't it be awesome to be financially independent? Like the whole FI thing. And so I worked really hard. I was in the Navy, saved up a bunch of money, bought some houses from Stu and from some other folks. And what do you know, at about the 2020 timeframe, when we were getting out, we with our retirement and a little disability and some other investments that I had and some cash flow, I got the check in the box, the FI check in the box. And we're like, okay, so what do we do? What do we do with this newfound financial freedom? And we had wanted to go overseas for a year or so and volunteer. Unfortunately, right when I got out, COVID hit, and nobody was going anywhere in the summer of 2020. So we looked around, we were in San Diego, and we said, we can't travel far overseas. Mexico is only about 15 minutes down the road. And I bet we could probably find something in Mexico that we can go to, and we could serve for a year and have a sabbatical-ish for a year. And that's what we did. We drove down the road 15 minutes, found a shelf-day orphanage down here in Mexico, and 1 year down in Mexico turned into 2, turned into 3, family, community, friends, church, whole, everything that I've missed for the last 25 years being in the Navy. So that's a little bit about me. What did I miss? Family. I've got 2 great kids, 2 boys, a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. And man, okay, here's a good one. So part of my fantasy of financial independence was, wouldn't it be awesome to be able to hang out at home, make breakfast for my boys, do a little work at the kitchen table, and just be around. That was a fantasy.
One thing you didn't touch on is your wife. I think Debbie, correct? In 19 years, is that accurate?
19 years.
All right. Fantastic. Wife, Debbie, 2 boys, Otis and Thaddeus. I look forward to digging into that a little bit more. But before we do that, love to ask about your background, learn a little bit more about what it was like for you growing up. So if you can, tell me a little bit about your dad. What maybe some of the things that were highlights from you, highlights or lowlights on things that you learned, things that you wish you didn't know, or whatever the case may be. And maybe even tell us about your dad's dad and what your understanding is there.
Yeah. So yeah, great. Going back to the memory pool. I tell you what, I remember both my dad and my dad's dad as just super hard workers. There's just the idea of hard work and dedication to your community and to your family. And the idea that your family is bigger than you and your community is bigger than you. And we are doing things not necessarily for ourselves, but we're doing things for those around us. And that when those two ideas come in conflict, am I going to do this for myself or for my family, self or community, that there's always a priority on family and there's always the priority on community before self. In the Navy, we have a term, you're focused on your ship, then your shipmate, then yourself. They had the civilian bird, community, family, self, but that was very strongly ingrained in me by both my father, Carl Laney, and my grandfather, Eugene Laney.
All right. So when you were growing up with that focus, what did that look like for you as a child and understanding that, or did you understand that yet as a child? Were you picking up on that already, or is that something you picked up later on in life as you're sitting here now as 48-year-old John looking back at it?
Yeah, man, I think I'm picking up on it later in life. One thing that's cool about us humans is we can tell ourselves whatever story we want. We can tell ourselves our childhood was terrible. We can tell ourselves our childhood was awesome. We can create our story as it's going. And so I think a part of it is the story that I'm telling myself. What was the second part of your question?
Did you understand that much later on in life?
Yeah, I think it was much later on in life. Did I comprehend that they were teaching me the value of hard work? No, man. I saw my old gramps out there, like always working. I remember clearly we bought our house on 58th Street, and my grandfather and my uncles, we all came down and we spent a weekend doing yard work, pouring mulch and cleaning weeds, all the stuff that you do when you buy a new house. And I remember that commitment to hard work from my parents.
What did your dad do for a living? What did your grandpa do for a living?
Yeah, my grandfather was a chemical salesman. So he sold chemicals that make plywood, a glue salesman at Ryco out of Eugene. And then my father was a seminary professor at Western Seminary, Portland. So I didn't see my dad work much, but I did see him work when he came home. And I remember any time we'd go out and chop wood. That's how we heated our house during the winter. We'd go out in the summer, chop wood, spend a weekend or so chopping a couple cords of wood, take it all in, get it dried, put it in the house. So just going through that, our yard. Yeah, both our primary house, we had a pretty large yard. So with the large yard comes a lot of work, and just seeing them out working and doing.
Yeah, those are some of my fondest memories, is going out and doing the things that my dad was doing, just like the hands-on stuff, whether it was working on the car, cutting trees down to go cut cords of wood at a time in upstate New York. I with the chainsaw, but the axe became my thing, right? Like I wasn't allowed the chainsaw. Dad wouldn't let me do that as a 10-year-old boy, but I probably would not have been allowed in the military missing a leg. So, but yeah, I swung that axe around like crazy, just chopping cords of wood at a time. It was ridiculous, but I loved it. I mean, for me as a young boy trying to figure out what kind of person I was, that was a lot of fun to me. Do you have any siblings?
Yeah, I did. I was the oldest of three. I had two younger sisters that were real close in age to me, and then my younger brother is 11 years younger than me.
Wow, okay. All right. What would you say they would say about their experience with your dad? The oldest tends to have a different perspective than the younger ones.
Great question. Probably something similar. I would say that, if I say about that, that's a tough one. Probably something very similar that I would say, although looking at it from my perspective, 40 years ago, whatever I say is probably not going to be as accurate as what reality is.
Of course.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even venture a guess. I know that the family and the community, that was something that they would definitely put a priority on the family and the community.
Okay.
There we have.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've ever asked that.
And community is, I remember we'd pick up an old lady, Alta, and she was an old shut-in on our way to church. And for years, like we'd pick up this old lady, Alta, and just seeing that my parents do that, take time out of their Sunday to pick up, drop off an old lady makes us continue to do that, makes us kids see that and follow that action.
Awesome. Yeah. Because, and I think that if we are aware of the fact that we are doing those things because that's what we saw, and if we're aware enough to realize that, okay, that means that the things that I'm doing, my kids may one day when they're 48 be doing those same exact things that they're seeing me do, making sure that we're living intentionally and that we're representing what it means to be a productive member of society intentionally. And if we're not, then they're catching something. They're watching us do something. What is it they're watching us do? What is it that we're laying the path for their future? Are we helping them lay tracks for a really solid future, or are we helping them lay tracks for a dreadful experience that they're going to be smacked in the face with later on in life? So what did your mom do for a living?
She was a homemaker. Yeah, she took care of us for knuckleheads.
Yeah, that is a phenomenal job that I cannot wait for my wife to enjoy embracing, if that is what she wants to do when she retires next year. We were chatting about what does it look like when she retires. And I told her, I said, what does it mean to you for me to be just a great mom hanging around at home? I said, it means whatever you want it to mean. If that's truly what you want to do, then that's what, I want you to embrace the fact that you get to be a mom, that you get to be present with your kids and not be at work 13 hours a day and not be told by some colonel or some general that you need to do this thing, or have to worry about on Saturday afternoon, like the general calls and says, hey, I need this thing done by the end of the day. That's where I would love it to be. But right now, I don't know if you've been seeing any of the drama with that. I wish I remember his name, but the Kansas City football kicker, the comments he made at the Catholic school, what is it, a benediction or not benediction? So he did a speech at this Catholic school talking about, and he said he had a whole thing, and there was like a 2-minute thing that went viral about him basically telling women to get in the kitchen and cook, which is not at all what he said. But he was talking about, hey, I want to talk to the women right now because you've been given these diabolical lies from society telling you about all this stuff. Like, there are many of you that are going to go on to be CEOs and leaders in great companies and do amazing things. But I'm sure a lot of you are really excited. Like, your number one thing you're most excited about is having kids and getting married and having kids and raising a family. And I want you to, if that's your calling to go do that, then do it. Don't let the world tell you that you need to go be a CEO. That's being a homemaker is an amazing. And I wanted to stress this now because you just mentioned your mom being the homemaker, and that makes me super thrilled that was able to happen. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on at least the concept there. What was your understanding growing up with your mom being the homemaker?
Yeah, dude, I tell you what, some of the most fun that I've had as a dad is opening up our house to kids and friends and taking kids to the movies and being a friend of my kids' friends. And man, it's just, I enjoy that so much more than just about anything else I do. I would love to be in the kitchen, cooking. We make homemade pizza. We make homemade fried donut. I enjoy doing that with my kids and my kids' friends just about more than anything else. I love it. I enjoyed it at a strange level. I feel like I shouldn't enjoy this so much. It's so much fun. But yeah, man. Yeah, so I've loved it. I don't know how my mom experienced it, but I would imagine it's pretty similar. It runs in the family. My grandma was a host. My mom really enjoys kids and really enjoys having people over. They're always having guests over at their house. And I can only imagine that she embraced that. Embrace that for all it was worth. And they made a very conscious decision. My dad was a seminary professor, and so they didn't make a ton of money. And she made a conscious decision. Do I stay home and do something that gives me incredible meaning and gives my kids a great education in the house? Or do I go to work and make a little more money and lose a little bit of meaning? Is that the question we all deal with? I mean, your wife's dealing with that too. She made a decision to go into 20 years. It's a decision everybody has to make. No judgment on what you make, but everybody has to make that decision.
So how did the son of a seminary teacher and a homemaker decide to join the military? Where did that kind of come in?
I wish I knew how my personality was formed, and I don't. And I think I realized that I used to think my dedication and my drive and my business sense was self-generated. Oh, I'm just a hard worker. Really? Did I just wake up and decide to be a hard worker? I think hard work chose me. I think dedication chose me. Some people, it doesn't choose everybody. And I don't know if it was just me deciding, hey, I just want to wake up and be a hard worker and join the military. How did that come? I don't know. I think the military chose me. So I heard about the Air Force Academy. I tell you what, it sounded so cool. Oh, an academy. Oh, Air Force. Oh, you must all be pilots. And pilots are pretty cool. And you fly these awesome planes. I want to go to the Air Force Academy. I didn't know what to do other than study hard and study hard. I was from Oregon, so it's not like a big military culture in Oregon. Either my family had done military, except for grandparents during World War II. So high school came around and I applied for all the service academies, and I did not get into the Naval Academy. So took a year off, went to prep school, and then reapplied again. And what do you know, the next year I got selected. So I think better said rather than I desired this out of the academy, or I really liked the Navy aspect or this. I think the academy just chose me. And it was a great fit because I'm a rule follower. I like order. I like structure. A nerd. It's not a great fit for everybody, but it was a really good fit for me.
Awesome. So I used to be many moons ago a dog handler in the Air Force. So I had a bit of a love-hate relationship with EOD folks. And you were an EOD guy. So how did you end up going into EOD? Was that right out of the Naval Academy? You talked about being a pilot and like flying planes and all that. And then you go become an EOD. So how did that process work?
Yeah, I was interested in going to the academy because it was tough and hard. I was interested in SEALs and EOD. So I pursued both of those. I got picked up for EOD, and it was a much better fit for me than if I had gone SEALs. So the Navy knew that I was a much better EOD officer than I would have been a SEAL. So I'm very glad that I did not get selected for my first choice. I wanted to do something tough. I was young, dumb, and full of drive, and just wanted to do the hardest thing I could in my late teens and early 20s and start at the start of my career. I want freedom. I want to follow my passion, be free. And I got out and I got it. And it was awesome for, a week or so. And you know what, dude? Nobody needed me. I volunteered and I was nice to be around. And it was nice that I cleaned up and cooked. And it was nice that I volunteered at an orphanage. And it was nice that I could push kids on a swing. And I volunteered at a couple other places. But man, if your wife misses 2 days at her job, she comes back and she has a massive emails and to-do lists. People need her. You can't just not show up on Wednesday. When I got out, I experienced a profound loss of meaning. Nobody needed me anymore. That was the hardest thing that I experienced. And I thought I would work on my own business, and I did. And I spent a lot of time on that, but it was at a very different level. I experienced what Viktor Frankl wrote about in his book, A Man's Search for Meaning. He said, and I'm inaccurately summarizing it, for a long time people thought that it was power. Nietzsche said it's power. That's what men get up for. Get up in the morning because they want power. Power's great. Or people want sex. Freud. Men would get up in the morning so they can have power and have sex. Okay. And those are great. But Frankl said, no, it's not that. People get up because they need meaning. They need to be needed. That is why they get up. I experienced that in a German concentration camp. I experienced the most profound loss of everything else, except the people that made it often were the people that were needed. Why does your grandma get up and cook dinner for you guys? Because she wants to be needed. She needs to be needed. She go to Florida, hang out by the pool. Gets up and serves other people for that meaning. And that's what I lost. And that was NOFUN. That was no fun at all, losing that perception of being needed and the meaning side.
Man, so how did you work through that then? Because you just talked about the fact that sitting at that orphanage, you're still not really needed. So what have you changed that into? Like, where is it that you are needed now?
Yeah, so it was a process. It was not quick, and it's not. I don't even know if it's complete. I'm still not needed as much as I was needed in the military. A couple things is I redoubled my efforts. Instead of just volunteering, I started doing projects at the orphanage. I redid all their Wi-Fi system to make it a firewall protected for the kids there. I got plugged in more with another ministry here in the Valley, became their operations guy. So I was actually needed. I had emails and emergencies to solve. And then I started flipping houses and became a realtor over the last year. So when you have a partner and your partner's a contractor and he's not a money guy, you're needed. Like you're needed to do the money side. You're needed to run the finances. You're needed to get the insurance and work with the banks and do all that type of work. As I'm plugged in, and then the final step is we're moving back to Newburgh. We're moving back home to Newburgh so that I can re-engage in community, re-engage in that. Part of it for me is to re-engage community and become that realtor where people need me to do good work and to do honest, high quality work to help people find their next house, buy or sell their next house. But yeah, man, I'm not out of the woods yet, but I clearly see that I've got a pathway to be needed over the next couple of years.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the BizDad podcast. Super excited to chat with Pete Armstrong today, father of 3. I'm really looking forward to chatting with him. So Pete, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about who you are, tell us about your family and also your business.
Got it, man. Thank you. Who am I and a little bit about my fam and my biz. I'm Pete Armstrong. I live in Madison, Wisconsin. Born and raised in Milwaukee, though. I moved here about 10 years ago. I love it. As a kid, I was into sports. Always play more recreational than just organized, but I love sports. It's always the class clown. Kind of always one of the leaders in the groups. But also grew up in a challenging household. I was out of the house as much as possible. Riding my bike, playing tag, playing sports, doing drugs, all the things as a kid. Yeah, and man, I think just in my 20s, I was in the restaurant industry. I was a bar manager, bartender, front of house manager, server, always in like higher end restaurants. Didn't have a degree, just went straight to the restaurant industry. And then I quit the restaurant industry and got a management position and a commercial cleaning company. And I was connected through a customer of mine at this high-end restaurant that I worked at. And I did that gig. I was a manager for about 2 years. That was awesome. I learned a lot that I was like, I don't want to work nights anymore. I want to be home with my family because I became a parent around that time. This was in 2005. I was about 25 years old. My first daughter, who is graduating this Saturday from high school, which it's bittersweet. Thank you. And then, yeah, I was in this business for a while. Then I was laid off from my job in 2010. But in 2010, man, it was a big year because in the fall of 2009, I broke up with the mother of my children. I had 2 children. My son was born in 2008, and he was born with some pretty serious birth defects. So he spent about 6 weeks in NICU. It's all a pretty life-changing experience for me. Mm-hmm. Bring us to 2010. My son was about a year and a half. He was doing okay, but he became basically a single dad. And I ended up tearing my ACL on January 2nd of 2010, playing basketball, which was one of my favorite sports. And then on Monday, I got laid off from my job. And I was like, what the, you know what? After getting the evaluation on my knee, I'm a good candidate for a job, and I'm a single parent. So I decided to go back to school in 2010 and get my undergraduate degree. And I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment with my 2 kids. I sold my car, bought a bike with the Burley, and I carted my kids around in that to and from school. This was in Milwaukee, and I went to UW Milwaukee. I lived on the 3rd story of a 9-elevator building, old school Milwaukee apartment building. I can remember days, Adam, carrying one kid in my arm and my crutch, like coming up the stairs, and my 4 or 5-year-old daughter carrying groceries.
Yeah.
Damn, man.
Yeah.
At the time, though, it wasn't that bad. I think because I was in this small space with just my kids. And you get a little emotional thinking about it, but it was just cool to be with my kids, like constantly. Mm-hmm. I got my degree, my undergraduate, and I was the first person in my family to get our college degree. So the first generational college student, even though I'm a white male, that just wasn't. People did it in our family. And so that was really cool. I felt proud of myself. During that time, I was also invited to do grad school, which was very surprising for me because for me, I was in high school, I barely went to school. So for someone like me to go to grad school was pretty surprising. And I did it. Even I didn't believe in myself, but people believed in me, which was probably for the first time ever. I could really see someone believe in you, and that was very cool. And all this time, man, I was a single dad. I had primary placement of my 2 kids. The mother of my children decided in early 2010, actually, when I tore my ACL and lost my job, and I decided to go back to school. About a month later, she's like, hey, I'm pregnant, and I'm moving to St. Louis with my boyfriend. And I'm like, what? But I got a lawyer, and I was able to we did shared custody, and I got primary placement. And throughout my entire returning adult into education, I was a single dad. And I was on all the programs, man, on all the financial aid, what you call welfare. I did whatever I could to get that degree and take care of them kids. Yeah. And we lived in a great neighborhood. We did all the things. And I met in about 2014, I think it was. I was in grad school, and I've been struggling with pornography the majority of my life and casual sex. So it's just, in hindsight, I learned that was my coping mechanism, right? The way in which I found relief. But in 2014, I went and saw a therapist for my first time in my life. And he helped me understand you have childhood trauma, you have anxiety, you have depression, you're addicted. And I was like, oh, so life this isn't for everybody? Not everyone feels this way. Yeah. Funny, not funny. And man, I was able to walk away from porn in 2014 after a couple months working with him, and I haven't went back. So it's been 10 years, almost to the day. I heard that. The crazy thing is I met a woman about 3 months later in grad school. So it went well. She started almost being a part-time mother to our children. She got a job in Madison, and she invited us to come live with her. And that was a difficult decision. Born and raised in Milwaukee, my entire family network, as you can imagine, as a single parent, you need so much help. I had my family, and I also had my kid's mother. Their side of the family also lived in Milwaukee and were instrumental in helping me raise Francis and Etienne. Moved to Madison, got a gig at UW-Madison in the area of my master's research, which was just insane. Exactly what I researched was the exact job I got at UW-Madison, which was really just couldn't believe it. Very ironic. And then I had another child with my wife. We got married about 6 months after moving to Madison. And then we had a child about a year later. And I was working at UW-Madison for many years. 2020, COVID hit, and it was the straw that broke the camel's back on my marriage. The kids were in the same place. We were working in the same place all at the same time. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety. And my wife and I separated in May of 2020, and we were divorced by December of 2020. Very quickly, we both wanted it, which was cool, so amicable. But in 2020, I had hired a life coach. And I had a therapist too, but I had a life coach because I wanted to start a coaching business, because I had taken some coach training at UW-Madison when I was in my position. And I was, how would I do this? I took this coaching training, and Adam, I was 2 hours into the training, and I'm like, I want to do this the rest of my life. And this was in fall of 2018. Since in 2020, I want to hire a life coach to help me start my life coaching business. She had her own business. And obviously, you can imagine 2020, she's helping me navigate a lot more. So she helped me in 2020. I took this program, mental fitness training program, through my life coach called Positive Intelligence. Radically changed my life. I was already moving in the direction of healing and loving myself and taking care of myself. But this program helped me understand the power of empathy for yourself, learning to empathize with yourself. In that, for example, I struggled with addiction, and I had an alcoholic father, and my parents always fought, right? All the things that felt fitting about belonging to the family that I belonged to, which I didn't realize. I always thought the shame was because of the addictions I had. But through the work, I realized that I've done in my past, and now you get shame before that. And the addictions helped you with that shame. But this program helped me, this mental fitness training program through positive intelligence helped me understand that you can empathize with yourself and that, like, wow, it's been hard being you. I never, ever thought I could do something like that. Like, to actually look in the mirror and be like, it's been hard being Pete Armstrong. And that was a game changer for me, Adam. In addition, I learned about the mind, about how the mind actually works, that there's this inner critic judge construct that's trying to keep you mentally and emotionally and physically safe. But it's every human has it. But for some people, it's really damaging. And for me, it was really damaging because whatever it said to me, you're not worthy, you're not smart, you don't belong, I believed it.
Mm-hmm.
But as a 40-year-old white male with a master's degree, I never knew this stuff.
Yeah.
And so when I learned this, I did more research, obviously. I didn't just take the mental fitness for truth. I did other research on it. And sure enough, this is a thing that is in psychology and in the mind and neuroscience. I went from, I'm not worthy, to my judge says I'm not worthy. Game changer. When I found out that it's not true, what it says about me, that was like, wow. And so I took that program. In addition, when I turned 40 in 2020, the day after, I started to take alcohol in my life. I would say they call it a gray area drinker, where it's not social and you're not like a binge drinker. I called it a sobriety tour. And then I called it a tour because I didn't know where I was going. I just knew take alcohol out of my life for a year and see what happens. And sure enough, man, I took it out of my life in 2020, the day after I turned 40. And 1 year to the day, I left UW-Madison, beautiful position, job, university, and I started my men's coaching business. It's a real problem. And men need connection, and humans need connection, and men need good relationships. I've been blessed to have amazing friendships in my life. I have not succeeded in romantic relationships, but I've had amazing other mentor type relationships and friendships. So I've never really felt too lonely, but I have felt lonely in my life. When I read the loneliness study and happiness study by Harvard, I was like, I got to help men, because I know so many men that are struggling with addiction or loneliness. How much I want to help dads understand how the mind works, that they can start loving themselves, that they don't need alcohol to get through life. They don't need pornography, like that these things have just helped you survive, brother. And I didn't understand them until I started doing the work, right? But what I realized is when I took alcohol out, when I took pornography, casual sex out of my life, when I took those things away, it was like, I could see clear. I could see even. Still hard, still got to do the work, but life was much better. Greater self-confidence, greater mental clarity, more energy, better emotional regulation, which means I wasn't as angry and anxious, which allowed me to be a better father.
You mentioned having an alcoholic father, right? How did you go from that portion of your life? Let's just rewind. Tell me what it was like for you growing up, like in a little bit more detail about your dad, what it was like having your dad around as your father figure.
The conundrum of my dad is that my dad, I can remember my dad's anger. So now that I've learned, anger is okay. It's aggression. It's not good. My dad was aggressive when he got angry. And I have a couple memories, as a matter of fact, now that I've done the work, add-ons, were pretty foundational to how I saw the world and how I saw myself in the world and how I saw myself in the family that I belonged to. My dad, I can remember him getting arguments with my neighbors for like us running in their yard, and then the neighbor father would come over and, hey, don't really want the kid doing this or that, and he would just attack him. And man, I remember that was so embarrassing. I remember as a kid, I had this, and then we couldn't go in that neighbor's yard.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened with multiple neighbors. I couldn't go in neighbors' yards. I couldn't go in some neighbors' houses. I wasn't the worst troublemaker, but I was a little bit of a troublemaker. Makes sense, right? My dad was with an alcoholic and he was angry. and the relationship with my mom and him was not good. I remember him yelling at her often. I want to say I remember physical abuse with her, but I don't fully remember that. I do remember physical abuse with me several times. But if anything, being around him, I was nervous, like he was going to hurt me. And then there was this other side of him, Adam, that was loving. It was clear. So interesting dichotomy. I don't think I got a lot of time with him, and I also didn't get a lot of time with my mom. I think that's what led me to coping unhealthily with like pornography and magazines, and then eventually my middle teens turning to drugs. My dad also smoked pot. I think I found my dad's weed 12 or 13. One of my brother was like 2 years younger than me. We went in the garage and smoked it and tried it.
Mm-hmm.
If I connect to my body right now, in my body, I feel like a little tense, little tightness. And it's because in some way, shape, or form, I just almost remember what it was like being there 30 years ago, 43. And it was just chaotic. And not knowing, there was a lot of uncertainty. Like, I didn't have to do my homework. I barely went to school. What the hell I got away with it? And I remember something my dad told me. He said, I don't care if you do drugs, just make sure you do it with me. I don't want you to do drugs. Try it with me first. And he said, you need to learn how to balance a checkbook. That's what's important in life. Honestly. And so I had in hindsight, one of the things I struggled with, Adam, majority of my life, up until probably about 3 years ago, and I still, in the last 3 years, it's just dissipated and not been as concentrated as the belong. I never felt like I belonged, man. And listen, man, I didn't know why I didn't feel that until I got some really good mindset coaching and therapy. Actually, mindset coaching, not even therapists, you first frank, inner child type work, that I realized that, the first time I felt like I didn't belong was when someone in childhood, I didn't know this is a subconscious, brother. I couldn't go in someone's yard. He couldn't go in someone's house. And I remember that feeling. At the time, I was a child. I didn't know, I don't belong. You're just like, man, this kind of sucks to me. We don't fully internally understand it. But that happened, that pain, that carried that wound for a long time. And even like with other friendships, like I always have all these cool friendships, like different groups of people. And I belong to so many different groups, but it's almost at the same time like I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere.
Yeah.
And dude, that manifests in ways of that's pain. That's wounds, man. There's nothing more than the human wants than to be accepted. That is hardwired into the human existence. And that's what also I try to help men understand. Hey, listen, you may not understand, but you've been rejected. You've been abandoned. That wounds, those wounds, man, they're still showing up in today. You know how they're showing up, I know? Because you get angry about this. You have anxiety about that. Right? And it's thankfully I'd done the work to heal the majority of that. But that's what it was like being me. It was like, I felt like I didn't belong. My dad was on the hall. My dad was angry. My parents got divorced. I think I was about 14 or 15. I was the oldest sibling. I had a brother and a sister. My brother was in the middle. My sister was the youngest. I remember my parents was a volatile night. I remember the last time my dad was in the house, thinking of the jail. And my dad's dad, to get to deeper, and that's the question and answer that is, my dad was an alcoholic. My grandpa was an alcoholic. They're Irish. I'm pretty stereotyped there. They were Irish. I can just remember my grandma and grandpa of my dad's mom and dad. Honestly, I remember Paul Mall and Pass the Ribbon. And it's right now, 30 years later, we know the consequences of smoking and alcohol. It's like family dynamics and our own personal health. And it's, damn, man, my dad had a rough. True alcoholic family, parents, 4 kids, including my dad.
Mm-hmm.
It's no wonder why my dad was the way he was. He worked for the Wisconsin Gas Company, the majority of the Donnelly, and he went to work every day. He didn't miss work. But his job only took him 4 or 5 hours instead of 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he went after 4 or 5 hours.
To the bar?
Every day.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, you say, as an alcoholic, we label people, but the work that I do and understand, taking a trauma lens, my dad was struggling with something.
Yeah.
People don't become addicted to something because, oh, that's just cool. I have no choice. People become addicted to something because it helps them with some sort of pain. And it becomes a problem then. But the addiction is not the problem. Problem is a deep inner core wound that people don't know how to fully handle. And so what do? They reach for something external to help them feel better about themselves. Numbs the pain or helps them avoiding thinking about it. And who doesn't want to be out of pain? So now I've accepted him. I've forgiven him. I have empathy for him. And wow, has that been healing in my journey? And that's something I tell men, like, your father or mother wounds, listen, man, if you haven't tended to those, you don't even know what the hell I'm talking about. Look into it. Because if your relationship isn't the way you want it to be with your wife or partner, or you've been divorced like me a couple times, I guarantee it has to do with child. And that's the angle that I look at things now, is I like help men do the deep work, because the outcome of doing that deeper work is the better relationships. That's what we all want, Adam, right? I want a better relationship with my kids. I want my kids to trust me and love me and know that they're loved. I know that they can do anything they set their mind to. But when we're struggling ourselves, that's in the way of us helping our kid be who that they can be. Does that make sense? Yeah. You need to take care of yourself. You need to work on the things that are in your way so you can become the man that you desire to be. And if you don't work on the things that are in your way and you keep running into the same freaking problems, you're not unworthy because of that. If you broke your arm, Adam, what are you going to go do? You're going to go to a doctor, right? And get it so you can get fixed and it can heal. It's just the same thing. It's just emotional. It's not your fault. Even though we blame ourselves, but it's not. So I'll stop right there. That's just a little bit of what it might be me as a child, and then like how I now see how it impacted my struggles on this other side. Curious, open, accepting, understanding, grieving.
Yeah.
Like we all wish we had a father that was like not like that.
I am super excited to talk to Jay Bourgana. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us about who you are. Tell us about your business.
Yeah, my name is Jay Bourgana. I live in Parkland, Florida, close to Boca in South Florida. I'm 46-year-old. I'm married. Jennifer, I've been married for 12 years, been together for 13. And we have 2 beautiful children. Isabel is 10 and Jack is 8.
Very good. It's 12 years. You got started right away, 2 kids within the first 4 years. That's my wife and I. It took us 4 years to have our first kiddo, and then it was every 4 years after that. It was like, what the heck? So it took us forever to have all 3 of our kids.
We got married 14 months after we met. So we got engaged 12 months at the anniversary, and then we got married a couple months later.
That's awesome. Yeah, when you know it's ready, then make it happen. Can you tell us a little bit about your business as well?
Yeah, it's technically just retired. I sold the company back in 2018, moved to Hawaii, spent about 4 years drinking Mai Tais and margaritas on the beach. And then I decided that I needed to get serious again and be more productive. I moved to the mainland, and now we're doing business acquisitions. We buy small businesses anywhere between $1.5 million in revenue to 5 to 10 million in revenue. And the goal is to consolidate them and either hold for forever or sell at some point.
Awesome. Yeah. Do you target specific types of small businesses or just about any type?
3 categories right now. Anything in the home services. So landscaping, irrigation, plumbing, and then anything in the wealth management space, and anything in commercial services. So commercial, electrical, commercial, anything. So that's roofing, remediation. Yeah.
Nice. Your background, I want to dig into that a little bit. You have a very interesting background, but I always ask everybody about their dad and kind of what it was like growing up with their dad and what they got from him or what they didn't get from him. So if you can, let's rewind all the way to the beginning of Jay Bourgana's life. What was it like for you growing up outside of the country, of course, where you're born and raised? So let's hear a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I was born in Morocco in the late 70s, massive inflation, all kinds of like economic turmoil. My parents got married probably a couple of years before that. They were young and they didn't know what they were doing. As soon as the kid got in the mix, everything blew up, from their financial situation to their stress to everything. So they got divorced. My mother and I went to live with my grandpa. 3-4 years later, my parents came back together and had my sister. And then the same kind of like pattern again. 3-4 years later, they got divorced again. So essentially I was living between homes my whole childhood. I had like massive financial uncertainty, massive kind of life uncertainty that made it where early on I was trying to figure out how can I take control essentially of my life? How can I find my way through life and not have this massive overhang that I could be homeless on any day? And especially the second time when my parents divorced, my grandfather passed away around the same time. He was like the core father figure for the family, which made it a lot harder because now my grandma and her kids had their own financial uncertainty. So they didn't want to take on another burden of 2 more children. So I had this whole kind of awareness of not being wanted, especially in that situation, and not having life certainty. I'm not going to say just financial, but all of it, all the basic needs, if you will. So early on, I remember 6-7-year-old, I'm asking people around me what they did, how much they made, how much is their rent, how much is their water bill, how much is their electrical bill. Wow. And it's fascinating because you ask enough people, you start noticing the patterns of the people who have their act together and people who don't, and people who know and people who don't, and majority of people just don't know. So early on, I came to the realization that no one knows anything. So that's essentially like my base case for everything in life. Is that no one knows anything. And I start with essentially basic rules, basic fundamental questions. What are we doing here? What's the goal? And I just build it from there. So it was a very valuable lesson for sure, because it frees you up to be more creative, frees you up to explore more, to explore beyond the boundaries of your family, your neighborhood, your city. It allows you to just roam a lot freer and be creative in the type of people that you seek information or advice from.
Man, that is, at 6, 8, 10 years old, I was riding my bike around everywhere, never asking anybody anything. It was just me and my buddies out to rule the world, shooting BB guns at each other and stuff. Were you around adults that talked to you about that, or was it just your understanding of the uncertainty in which you lived that led you to ask those questions?
Yeah, just understanding the situation, understanding. My mom was a kind of like a stress basket, so she made it even worse for us.
Yeah,
it's good and bad. Everything is good and bad. It's bad from one sense because it created a lot of too much cortisol for a young person, but it was good because it lit a fire under me to actually figure it out and figure it out sooner than I needed to. So I almost had a head start as opposed to my cousins and all my family on thinking about these things and becoming a little bit more responsible, a little bit more of an adult, and just take responsibility for myself, if you will.
I want to keep walking down that.
Yeah. So listen, so I'm happy to explore it, whichever you want. I tell my kids this stuff, so we talk about this every day.
And we'll get into it on your morning breakfast meetings that you guys have. We'll definitely get into some of that. But I just don't understand, so I saw, like, my parents, there's a lot of paycheck to paycheck as I was growing up. And I just, there was always, oh man, something broke in the car. I have no idea how we're going to get this fixed type of stuff. Nothing I can do about it. And I didn't so it never registered in my brain. But then I'm listening to you, I'll sit back and listen to you a couple times that you've talked about the various different markets and how you delve deep into the market and understand what's going on, the different ways of how credit's being utilized in America and where debt's going and all this stuff. And you'll dig into all of that stuff on a micro and macro level. So apparently something has been there for a long time for you to want to do all of this stuff. But sparking that fire, I'm just curious, was it something maybe in school? Have you ever sat back to really say, okay, a normal and I'm not calling you abnormal necessarily, but a normal 6, 7, 8-year-old doesn't sit there and think, okay, I see what's going on around me. Let me figure out how I can make it better for myself later. Like that.
Yeah.
How do you think you walked down that path to get there?
It's very tough. I think maybe I have a little bit better quality memory. Like I just pick up stuff. I was one of those kids that's always listening. I remember in kindergarten, they would ask us to take naps. The school teachers were talking about diet advice. And one of the ladies was telling the other one that dark chocolate was good for you. And then I'm with my mom and her friends, and she was talking, and I jumped in the conversation, telling them about all the diet advice that the teachers were talking about. And so I'm like, how do you know this? And I'm just listening to stuff. So maybe I'm like that person just absorbs a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But I remember that my only, like someone had asked me one time, what is your first ever memory? Which is an interesting question. What's your first memory? And I'm like, my first memory was my parents fighting over what type of beans my mother had bought. And she bought the slightly more expensive than the ones that, she should have bought. And I remember that. So as a 2-year-old, because I remember the place where we were, and I remember that I know by that age, that's where I was. And a 2-year-old shouldn't have a memory like that. And maybe it's because there was a lot of emotion attached to that experience. So my mother had a lot of stress, or my father had a lot of stress, so that absorbed on me, so I remember it. So I'm not sure. Maybe the fact that my mother was, again, like I was telling you, it was a stress case, so she made everything more accentuated than it should. Mm-hmm. And that created these memories in my head of these moments. So it might have been that, but it may be a combination of both.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Especially if that is your first memory and that's where your brain goes to, is tying those. Because even that very first memory has something to do with finances, right? Yes. And like the numbers behind it. So like the very first memory, like for me, my very first memory that I remember is riding my big wheel around our house in Detroit when we lived in Detroit. And I remember riding my big wheel, and I wore that thing out, and I had this big flat spot on it, so it would go clunk, clunk every time I rode it. But that was my first memory. Not, I wonder what the cost of beans was. Like, so now all of a sudden you're sitting here thinking, it's about the trading of rice and beans in various different markets. Walk me through. So it sounds like you were maybe, depending on the math and how everything worked out, somewhere around 10 or so when your parents split up the second time.
Yeah. Right.
So walk me through what it was like after that. Your grandfather passed away, so your only real patriarch is now gone. How does the transition end up happening eventually to move to America, or what?
It's interesting because it goes into, you and I have heard the conversations around having your trust ready, having your financials cleaned up, sharing that information with your spouse, making sure that they know where things are and all that stuff. So my grandfather was old school, and same thing. My grandmother was not literate at all, and they had 13 kids. And when he died, they didn't know anything about anything.
Yeah.
And so they had to figure it out on their own. So that essentially what it did, it increased the level of stress that they had and the level of sense of scarcity, if you will. Even though they may have been okay, that they felt way more scared when that happened than they would otherwise, which essentially impacted us, who are these new mouths that are coming into my house to eat, to consume whatever limited resources we have. And it created this sense of, all right, my grandmother wasn't happy about it. And so I had to every day, sense that you're not wanted here, and then you needed to go and figure it out somewhere. And so early on, you got to focus, you got to do as well as you could at school. And as soon as you could work, you got to work. And anywhere you can make some money, you got to make money. And and you're just buying your time until that moment where you're going to be independent and go and do your thing.
Yeah. How long did that take? What were you actually doing in that time frame?
Yeah. So you couldn't work. The economy was not that great. Unemployment is very high over there. So you had to do little hustles here and there and go help with this and help with that. And then I had people that I knew who did some distribution for products. And so you go carry boxes, fill up trucks, whatever it takes, whether it is labor or trade or whatever. As soon as I could, whatever I could
do to make a couple bucks, I did. But it was amazing experience. I learned so much. I learned how to sell, I learned how distribution works. I know you learn networks, you learn cost of things, who buys what, stuff that's being sold that you never thought. It is fascinating. And so I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. It was just amazing. I wouldn't want it for my kids, but I wish they had a way for them to learn these things.
Yeah. I'm sure there is something, or sure there are some things that you're doing to try to provide the same, at least value sets and understanding of what's going on in there. So I'm looking forward to getting to that. How did you go from, talk to me about the transition from there to when did you actually come to the States?
Yeah. So right after high school, I started looking for work. Somehow, some way, their banks at that period of time, because unemployment was high, they started in hiring kids out of high school as opposed to hiring people in college, because if they hire people in college, they have to pay them a certain amount. There's a minimum wage for college degrees. So I ended up getting part of this cohort of young guys that came into the bank. And so it was a great opportunity. I worked there for 5-6 years. I did everything from consumer banking to business banking to international trade. I was the first guy in, last guy out. They gave me the keys to the bank within the first couple of months because I was always there early complaining why no one is here. And I was excited. And I tell my kids my first job was like $280 a month or something like that, 250 or 280 bucks a month. That's how it was my first, but I was so excited. You never work for money. You always work to learn. And I learned so much from that experience working at a bank. You learn who makes money, how, you learn who has it and who doesn't. You learn how people behave, how people sell, how people feel about money, how they manage their money. Businesses that have strong cash flow, businesses that don't have strong cash flow, good managers versus bad managers. There's so much to learn because you could see the bank accounts. Like there's nowhere to hide, if you will. You see the financials. There's no marketing or posturing or branding or anything. You see the real deal. So it was an amazing experience. So that's why, for me, it didn't matter how much I was making. As long as I keep my burn rate low, I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's the same thing I tell people when they're looking at underwriting apartments. Like the only thing in this deal that won't lie to you is the numbers.
Yeah.
Right? Because numbers don't lie. I can even write it in the paperwork, but the numbers will lie. But once you get the bank statements, like those things don't lie. Like the numbers, they're there. Where is the bottom line on this particular property? What's going on with it?
Exactly.
And that's a work to learn. You're not working for money. You're working to learn. And I very much was at the beginning, like my very first job, I'm like 90% certain I was just working for money. That was it. That's all I thought about was buying that new anti-skip Discman, right? Like I'm tired of my Walkman. I want the anti-skip Discman. So I'm working very hard for that first paycheck to do that. But that was it. That was all my brain was thinking about. The fact that you were on this trend already, which is probably why you started so early in the business side of the house too, and started doing all of that the way you do. But so after that first job working at a bank, where did you go to from there?
Yeah, so the whole time I was working for a French bank, and the whole time I'm like trying to figure out how to get out of Morocco and go somewhere else where there's more opportunity. And Morocco is a great country, it's beautiful, it's great people, but at the time, especially this was like mid-90s, it was tough to make it. There was a ceiling. Because I was working for a French bank, I was able to go to Europe quite a bit and see what opportunities are there. And I was there late 90s. Economically, they were not in good shape. And so I decided, okay, Europe is not the place. I was in France, I was in Belgium, went to the UK. So I decided, okay, I'm going to come to the United States. I had to pick between East Coast, New York and the East Coast and Orange County, California. I picked the weather. So I landed in Orange County, California.
And that was in the late 90s, you said?
No, this was early 2000s. So about 2002.
Okay, so shortly after the .com bubble and all of that fun stuff. So, like, what were your
going to the war, Iraq War, and all that good stuff
here? As an immigrant from I guess mostly Islamic country.
Yeah,
right after 9/11.
Yes,
in California.
Yeah,
shortly after the .com bubble. So we have all of these things coming in together. What was that like for you coming into this new culture, and what was the culture like to you?
It's funny. I didn't really think about it much. I was just excited to be here. It was something new. It was a new experience. Everything was new. One of my first memories being here, and I just landed like at 7 p.m. at LAX, 7 or 8. And by 3 in the morning, I was scrubbing pots in the kitchen, trying to make some money. I remember I was like, man, I was a banker just like 2 weeks ago. And now my hands are like with the soap and the hot, they're all white. And what the hell has happened? And then, you know what? It's fun. I was excited because I'm going to, whatever it takes, I'm here. And I heard that people had 2 jobs, and I come from a place where you could barely get one. And I asked, I was like, oh, is this legal? And it's, oh yeah, you can have more than one. Can I have 3? I was like, yeah, I'll have 5. First couple of years, I had 5 jobs, and I was go from place to place. And dude, I was happy as a clam. I didn't care. And so whatever it takes.
Thank you so much for jumping in today. I am thrilled to be chatting with John Edwin, father of 3 kiddos, married for a long time. So I'm looking forward to stealing some of his secrets on how to have a lasting marriage, raise 3 awesome kids. But John, before I tell too much about you, go ahead and if you can, introduce yourself, tell us about your family, and tell us about your businesses.
Yeah, Adam, thank you so much for having me on. When you launched this podcast, I remember you posted in the GoBundance Facebook page that you were launching the BizDad podcast, and I was instantly intrigued to potentially hop on and also listen to your content. So thank you so much for creating this, because I know you're adding a lot of value to not just fathers, but families. And that's what's so important in our lives. To give you a little background on myself, I grew up in Philly, born and raised. Not like Will Smith, because he was in West Philly. I was in another part of Philadelphia called, it would be considered North Philly, which is similar though, because Philadelphia in the neighborhoods, I grew up in a neighborhood called Laney, relatively rough neighborhood, rough upbringing. My father is from Pakistan, so he came over in the late 60s when he was in I think he was 27 when he came over and married my mom. And yeah, we grew up in the inner city, but when you grow up in a kind of a rough environment, but everyone else is that way, you don't know any different. Mm-hmm. And I like to, as we talked about a little earlier, Adam, a lot of the ways that I live as a father and a husband is different than the way I grew up. So my dad was a very kind of hard man, very patriarch system over in the villages of Pakistan. Mm-hmm. And the way, what the father says goes, which we want to obviously live strong as husbands and fathers. But we also want to make sure that we're sensitive to our wives and our kids. And yeah, so went on to Liberty University. I was a good athlete, thank God. So I got a partial scholarship for track and field to Liberty. And that was an amazing, going back a little bit to high school. My parents, they separated when I was in 10th grade. And the beautiful thing that happened was my mom moved me out of that neighborhood into the suburbs. And in 11th grade, I met my then girlfriend, now wife. And I thought that I was not good enough for Christine. She's an amazing woman. She was cheerleading captain in 11th and 12th grade and kind of out of my reach, or so I thought. But yeah, we continued to date since we were 16. We've never broken up. We're 45 now, and we continue to date now. And yes, then she went up to Penn State for 2 years. I went to Liberty. And junior year, she actually transferred over to Liberty. We both ended up graduating from Liberty University. And my daughter, we're jumping around a little bit, my daughter, who's now 18, just graduated high school, and she committed to Liberty. So she's going to take up nursing. Yes. And potentially be a nurse practitioner, but whatever direction she wants to go, we fully support. So going back a little, we graduate from Liberty, and actually our senior year, we got engaged. I knew that at 20 years old, I knew that Christine and I were going to be together forever. And so did she. And so we got engaged our senior year. And then when we both turned 21, right after we graduated, we got married.
Nice.
And we're living on love, because we, at that time, didn't have any money. We actually had a lot of debt.
Yeah, no kidding. 2 college students? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. We just started working right out of the gate. And then Christine got her master's at 24 in September. We had our first child, Luke, in October. So there was a quick turnaround. He came a little earlier than we had expected. So then we decided to have all 3 kids while we were young. So we had all 3 in our 20s. And yeah, now we're 45, been married 23 years. Luke is 20. Sylvie is 18 and our youngest Caleb is 15. And God has been really merciful in our lives.
That's awesome. Yeah. I wish that I would have met my wife when we were in high school. Like, it was one of those that we met when I was in the military much later on. And then I got out of the military, we ended up getting married and didn't have kids for 4 years after getting married. And then God decided we were going to separate each pregnancy by 4 years. So I wish that we had all of our kids in our 20s, but it is what it is. We had them all in our 30s instead. But absolute blessing. I love having kids. It's obviously something I'm passionate about. As we're chatting about this, but I'm looking forward to digging in a lot there. There's a lot there. And again, I know I said it to you already, but congrats on your daughter getting accepted to Liberty. That's awesome. You were sending me the pictures before the call. I loved it. Now, I want to go into a little bit more of your background. One thing, I did not know that your dad was Pakistani. This was news to me. So there's something that I'm finding a lot. So my wife is first generation American. Her mom was born and raised in Cuba, and her dad was born and raised in Spain. Ended up meeting each other in Spain because they left Cuba. My mother-in-law left Cuba to Spain because they wouldn't let her go to America. Cuba was like, "Oh, you're going to go to America. We'll send you to some other socialist country, not to America." And then she ends up coming here from Spain. But the passion and drive I hear from immigrants and their children is so much different to me than like fifth generation Americans who just seem to think that everything should be on a platter for them. And I'm intrigued by just personally analyzing some of these conversations. If you can, let's walk back to, you mentioned your dad being more of an authoritarian almost, and yep. I'm the patriarch, I'm the lead of this thing. Tell me what that was like growing up for you until you moved out. Like, what was the image you had of your dad then? What is the image you have of your dad now? How do you juxtapose those two things?
Yeah. Growing up, my dad was a big, strong guy. If you see most Pakistanis, they're not normally that big. For whatever reason, my family's a relatively big gene. I'm a pretty big guy. My dad was actually he was bigger than me. He had this kind of booming, big personality, which was amazing. And at the same time, it was intimidating, and it was always his way or the highway, which I tried to, as I got older, infiltrate that mindset where it's, hey, Dad, it's not always black and white. There is quite a lot of gray, and there's things that you need to consider about, your personality that could be a little bit softer, a little bit smoother, and you'll catch more flies with honey than vinegar. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's the way he lived. He was he was a hard man. But there were great lessons that I learned through that. Some of his good points was super generous guy, whatever you needed. If he had it, he had a big heart. He would give it to you. But then also, I think that ego was pretty big too, where he wouldn't accept other people's opinions or compromise with my mom on things. Mm-hmm. And so that created a lot of conflict, especially when you're from two so foreign cultures. But for me, I worked very hard. I was a good athlete. I was always grinding. And yeah, you learn not to take anything for granted when you grow up in a rougher neighborhood, because not just you, but nobody really has all that much at that point. So when I launched into college, I really went into overdrive, especially with my academics, where I was like, you know what? I have actually an opportunity right now to do something big. And I was studying exercise science. I planned on going on to get my doctorate in physical therapy. And then my senior year of college, I did an internship in PT, and I actually didn't like it. It just wasn't for me. It was a little too slow. So coming out of college, I went into sales for a short period of time, but then I went into personal training, which I never thought I could make any money doing. Mm-hmm. I started out at $8 an hour when I was 22 years old. But by the time I was 24, I launched my first LLC, which is called Strength Personal Training, which I actually ran for 20 years. And by the time I was 25, I was making well into the six figures, running my own business as a personal trainer, and one of the top trainers in the country.
That's awesome. Yeah, that the level of discipline that it takes I forgot what I was listening to recently, but they were talking about how just having your own fitness level shows just a level of dedication that you are willing to put in that is immediately attractive even to a mate, right? Like, it's, this person at least is self-disciplined enough to be able to do that. So that gives a good sign on where they're going to go in life. And I'm not saying that physical fitness is what got you to be where you're at, but in a way it is, right? Because you started your own company, started making a lot of money doing it, and just having that discipline and that drive that it sounds like you got a lot from your dad, even though you took a little bit more of the softer side elsewhere, I would assume, from your mom. You mentioned there was two very different cultures. Is your mom is she American?
Yeah, her family's been here for generations, blonde hair, blue eyes. It's funny. I saw her yesterday. We had lunch together. She's, oh my gosh, you look nothing like me.
Well, it's
Funny, but yeah, so but it was interesting too, because her parents passed away when she was young. So I really never met her parents.
Okay.
She didn't have siblings. So really, I just grew up with my Pakistani side, and I have 2 older sisters and then other siblings that came along when my dad remarried. But yeah, so I didn't really know my mom's family. I don't know them very well. But yeah, I found my own way through the books that I was reading. One of the books that was talked about a lot and isn't talked about all that much now, because everybody talks about Rich Dad Poor Dad, but How to Win Friends and Influence People was a big book that really influenced me when I was probably around 18, 19. I read that book, and I've read it many times. And it's just, you have to be the bigger person, and everyone has their own opinion. And when you make people wrong, you usually create enemies. And there is a time and place for that. But you also want to make sure that for me, I'm trying to live out my light for the Lord. And by doing that isn't telling others that they're wrong. It's just by showing others by how I live.
Yeah. No, I absolutely love that. And I definitely want to get into the Christianity side of the house, especially, let me preface this. How old was your dad when he came to America?
I think he was 27, 26 or 27.
And you said you had the family on the Pakistani side. Did your dad's family come over here as well, or is it just him?
Yeah, so he was one of the first that came over. And talk about hard work. From what I understand, he worked in a bubblegum factory and put himself through Temple Business School. And then he also started bringing his siblings over, brought his parents over. Yeah, so pretty much all of my family is here. I have some distant cousins that are over there that I know, but pretty much everyone is here, yeah.
Okay. And what was it that led him to come and the rest of his family to follow suit?
Yeah, I think it's the American dream. It's interesting that we're on this topic because my dad, when you talk about multiple generations that are here that kind of have maybe an attitude of entitlement, some type of expectation. My dad was actually really big on buying all made in the USA. So his cars, his clothes, he would check everything because it was just, and you talk to foreigners that come here now, and it's still very similar, where this is a land of such great opportunity, and there's just so much patriotism and pride to be here.
Yeah. And it's funny because for all the people who are complaining and saying that this is a terrible country, A, they've probably had generations of being here, and B, what country are you planning to line up and go to, right? Because I've been to a lot of countries. Some of them war-torn, some of them not, right? But there's still not another country that I'm ready to just say, you know what, I'm going to go over there and hang out there and knock on their door. But we've got a ton of people wanting to knock on our door. That doesn't mean that in line we're perfect by any means. There's always room for us to grow and get better as a country and improve. But man, oh man, I'd love to see some of this other stuff happen in some of the other countries, right?
Well, it's true. It's true. And I've traveled, my wife and I, we've traveled to a lot of countries as well. I've never been to a country that is anything like the United States, from landscapes to different environments to just the beauty of it and the culture.
Welcome to the BizDad podcast. Today, I am stoked to talk to a fellow pilot, a fellow dad, Brett Harmeling. Brett, if you can, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us about your family and then tell us about your businesses.
Of course. So thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Brett Harmeling. I live in Houston, Texas. I have an amazing, beautiful bride, Lucia. We've been married for almost 5 years. And then I have a 2.5-year-old son with another son on the way. So we are living full on right now, navigating the journey of being entrepreneurs. My wife also has her own business, and we work as a team with her business in mind. Happy Life Labs is one of my companies, and what it is a wellness collective connecting the world's most premier people, products, and places so that wherever you're at on your journey with health, whether you're a Formula One world champion or just trying to turn the corner on healing, recovering, losing weight, whatever the thing is, we have a company that introduces different biotechnologies and optimization tools to help you live a better life. And so it's been a really cool thing. And then I'm heavily involved in a private aviation concept that is going to disrupt the way that people move and travel, which is really exciting. And so I'm sure we'll get more into that on the call, but those are the two things I'm currently really invested in. I'm also a serial entrepreneur and invested in quite a few different companies. And so I have interest in those companies. Some of them are controlling and some of them are managing, but at the same time, I love philanthropy. And so I put my money where my mouth is and serve on several boards. One being Hives for Heroes here in Houston, which connects veterans to beekeepers, and apitherapy and working with bees is very therapeutic. And then part of my background is in anti-human trafficking. And so I serve with an organization called the Aerial Recovery Group. And so we do humanitarian disaster relief as well as anti-human trafficking. They kind of work in tandem, and just really grateful to use the resources, talents, and skills that I've learned over the course of my brief lifespan so far and putting them to work.
That sounds awesome. I think we're going to have a lot to talk about there, given my previous experiences. So your wellness side of the house, do you help work with slightly overweight dads who are podcasters and business owners? I seem to fit that mold rather well.
Yes. Yeah. The real thing, we should not be sitting, but I did get a lot of movement in this morning, so I'm actually resting right now. But at the same time, sitting is probably one of the top things that you can do to guarantee your chance of developing health problems. Getting yourself like a walking treadmill for your desk is really a great option.
Yep. I've got one sitting right there. It's literally right there, my treadmill desk. And I almost never, it seems to be holding more papers than it does people at the moment. Yeah. There you go. But no, that's awesome. I am looking forward to digging into a lot of this stuff. Before we do that, though, I want to learn a little bit about how you got into where you are right now. How old are you, Brett?
I'm 36.
36. Okay. Let's rewind quite a bit back to, let's 30 years ago or so, and learn a little bit about what it was like for you growing up. Maybe a bit about your dad, maybe even your dad's dad. One of the reasons I love to ask this question, so you can think about this as we're going through it, is we tend to either run away from or run towards exactly what we saw until something else changes our brain on how we're looking at it. Just learning about where you came from may help me understand a little bit more about who you are and why you do what you do. So you can, let's rewind and go and tell us a little bit about who you were growing up and who your parents were.
Yep. Great question. And I'm just grateful to have been raised in such a strong family. My dad and his parents and even my great-grandparents have all been critically important in the kind of development evolution of where I look at my last name and I take responsibility for it. I'm like, okay, I'm the legacy of the next generation of my family, because in some capacity, I'm somewhat of a miracle kid. My parents tried for many years. There's a 10-year gap between me and my sister. And so I was the first boy of the family. And so it's like a big deal, because the Harmeling name runs like all the way back to the first boat, Christopher Columbus days. And so I grew up in this, long story short, I grew up in this small little Dutch village. I'm pretty much 100% Dutch, and just rooted in the heritage and hardworking, disciplined family environment. And I think that's those characteristics, hardworking, disciplined, growing up on a farm, heritage, you're always around family. When you have structure in your life and you're a kid and you're crazy like I was, it's really important that you have things that you have to do, go to church, go to Bible study, chores, because if you don't, you derail. I would have totally been an addict or I just know, I guarantee you I would have ended up in down a bad path, because I'm hyper curious. And I love to try new things. And I had this healthy level of fear for my dad and my grandfather, and respect. Like, fear is the same as respect for me. And so I saw the life that they built, and my dad was in he was in warehousing essentially and farming his whole life. And so they did cheese. And so my dad was doing like massive volumes of cheese, like 15 million pounds a year through the warehouse. Yeah. Typical Wisconsin.
And I'm a fan of cheese, so I need to know your family very well. Let's do this.
Yes, yeah. What I saw is just my dad was always hardworking, and that's also how I got wounded unintentionally. So you can be mad at your parents for hurting you or not raising you, like, oh, you should have done this. I just say my parents did the best they could with what they had. No harm, no foul. But what I saw was a huge gap, a generational gap, and an opportunity in ways of in old school thinking. Like, I started to see patterns for like holidays, for instance, and I'm like, why do we even do that? That's just so dumb. It's bad food. Why are we still doing that tradition? We're poisoning ourselves. Now, back in the day, to be fair, like the food that people used to cook was much different than in today's chaotic reality of navigating a grocery store. But I say all that because I have a lot of respect and love for my dad. But as a little boy, all I wanted was to like feel loved in a way that I couldn't ask for. And when I say that, what I mean is I wanted my dad to hug me and to look me in the eyes and tell me that he loved me, and like physical touch versus just knowing that he loved me. I was like looking for more. But once again, going back to the fear and respect conversation, like I was also navigating, oh my God, like, how do I ask my dad tell my dad I need like a hug? That sounds like really like a little too touchy feely for my dad. And for the people that know me, like I'm very yogic and loving and I embody like quite a bit of feminine energy, even though I'm heterosexual, white, Catholic male.
With a beard, a nice beard, no less. So.
With a beard.
So when your dad was growing up, was it something that was there not really any affection with his dad either? Or was that just not the kind of relationship growing up on the farm, that type of thing, that it was just more of a much more masculine energy that did not like really foster that type of relationship?
Yeah, it's the kind of energy where you're like, figure it out.
Yeah.
You get it. Well, you don't have time to go blow your nose. You like figure out how to blow your nose without a Kleenex. Or you go to the bathroom or like whatever it is. And so it was like almost performance-based love. It was almost like, oh, if I scored a goal in soccer, for instance, then I felt like my dad would be very proud of me and I could seek that validation and love. Where I was like, hey man, what if I don't score a goal and I'm a total failure at athletics? Are you still going to love me? My brother was a pretty successful athlete and he's 2 years younger than me, but he was also bigger and stronger and just more likable. Cause I was like that crazy weird kid that I was like, got in trouble for asking questions that I was just curious about or doing things. And I was like high energy. So I was like annoying, always trying to have a girlfriend. I just was like on the chase and out for something more. And so until I moved to Chicago really is when or like college, I got myself into a pretty great school called Carthage. Until then, it was like the first time that I felt accepted. I'm like, oh, I can be myself. I can breathe. I never, for the first 18 years of my life, I never really felt like I could be myself.
Interesting. Just because you didn't think that you were going to be loved for being yourself? Is that?
Just felt like a black sheep of the family. I was like doing kind of different things. I was like getting in trouble, pushing the limits, questioning people. And now in today's world, that's what I teach to all the people that I coach, mentor, lead. When I do keynote speaking, I'm like getting people to tap into their own superpower. That's what it's all about. It's like that thing that you think that makes you weird, that's like your superpower. That's the thing you need to do more of. And that's what people love because nobody can take that from you and nobody can replicate it the way that you can. And so I just challenge people to tap more into that creative potential. And I'm even learning how to step into mine in new ways continuously.
So you mentioned a few things as far as your parents doing the best they could with what they had and the best they knew how to do, I think is how you said that. As you were growing up, it probably didn't feel that way. So at what point in your life did you realize that they were doing the best that they could or that they did the best they could?
I went through this program, men's self-leadership type thing called the New Warrior Training Adventure. It's like a healthy initiation for men. And it was in Chicago and it was 2012. And we did this Carl Jung's shadow work. And so this shadow work is a way where you look at the things that you hide, repress, and deny about yourself. Mm-hmm. And through that body of work in like really strategically facilitated processes and bioenergetic work, getting anger and rage and sadness out of your tissues through processes. I was able to see a side of myself, a version of myself that I never realized that I had inside of me. And from that moment moving forward, I stepped into my manhood and I'm like, you know what? Thank you, Dad. I love you. And I'm like, I'm going to take everything I learned from you, but I'm going to add to it. And I'm going to take total responsibility for raising my kids and my family and being the hero of my own family in a way that I think is meaningful and impactful. Because I missed so much time with my dad because he was always working. And I think a lot of that had to do with him trying to please his father. And I don't know, that'd be a good conversation for us to have. I felt like that was the transfer. It was like my dad's dad. My dad was seeking love and validation from his dad by working and doing things. Yeah. It was never like just being with each other. Or like I remember we went to Disney World with like grandparents like one time. It was like the one trip. But I was so young, I hardly remembered it. Yeah. I was like, I want to create more of those experiences with my family. And one of the reasons I'm really attracted to being wealthy and completely financial abundance is because I want to be able to like give my parents a quality of life that they don't even know is possible. Mm-hmm.
Have you had any of these types of conversations with your dad? You mentioned it'd be good to understand why your dad did what he did. Was it for his dad? But how about the feelings that you've had about what it was like for you growing up? Have you opened up with him at all about any of that?
Yes. Yeah, we've had these conversations, and there's amazing things that happens when you approach a difficult conversation. Like at first I was scared to have it. It took like years. I waited, and then I just realized, what's at risk for me telling my dad how I feel now? Like, I'm a man, and he stops talking to me because I acknowledge something that hurt me in the past. It's not me to shame. It's not like a shame thing. It's, hey, I've had this self-realization that I'm wounded, and I just wanted to thank you for everything you did. And I'm just letting you know it hurt me, and I love you, and I want to move. I want to, feel loved by you in a different way. And that's it.
Yeah.
So there's no, like, he doesn't owe me anything. Like, it's not like I'm expecting him to change or see anything different in me. I'm just like, hey, this is my experience.
I am stoked to talk to Dennis Callan. Really looking forward to chatting with him. If you can, Dennis, please go ahead and introduce yourself, your family, and tell us about your business.
Dude, Adam, thanks so much for having me. Pleasure to be here. So yeah, Dennis Callan, born and raised in the Philadelphia suburbs. I've got 3 kids of my own, divorced probably 9 years ago now. I think it's what it is. And then a girlfriend and her 2 kids just moved in officially last week. Been together 2 years. And so we're rolling 7 now from ages 15 to 5.
Nice.
It's pretty crazy. So mine are the older 3 and she's got 2 younger ones. And yeah, it's been pretty great. As you mentioned, I'm in the mortgage business, doing that all my life. I own a brokerage here in the outside the Philadelphia area, and then I do some real estate investing. I have a bunch of single family homes in the area and a couple duplexes, and then going to settle on my first larger multifamily 8 units here in the next, hopefully, month. So excited about that.
That's awesome. I love that size. I say that I love that size of property. All I've bought is larger properties. My smallest was a 62 unit apartment, and that was my very first property as well. And then I realized that I don't really dealing with investors that are not like friends, right? Yeah. Because I don't like sending investor emails and all the stuff. So I feel like I want to be in that 8 to 30 range, right? To have the 8 units to 30 unit range that's small enough to be able to take down with you and a partner or 2, but big enough to keep that economies of scale going and not have to worry about all the other stuff. I'd love to chat with you a little bit about how that deal went and what made you decide to go that route. But before we do,
talk next year. We'll talk. Oh, how much I might
see what your thoughts are. It's they tend to be, especially if you're buying one that needs a lot of work, or if there's something else going on there, then it tends to be a process. So you said basically all of your adult life you've been a mortgage officer. Let's start back before that on what led you to get to there. So I want to walk through maybe your relationship with your parents growing up. Tell me a little bit about who your parents were, what you learned from them, what you learned to do, what you learned not to do, that type of stuff. One of the things I really like to emphasize is the more we understand our parents, especially our dads, since we're men and we tend to go use that father figure if they're around, or even if they're not around, as a basis for kind of who we are. So the more we learn about our parents and can understand who they are. Just want to walk down memory lane with you to learn a little bit about what it was like for you growing up and who your parents are.
My dad was a controller at a local hospital. He had that job for his whole career. It's crazy. Got the watch, got a ring for some reason. I don't know why.
Okay.
And he was 9 to 5 there and cut out Thursdays and played golf every Thursday, a couple times on the weekend. And then my mom was a kindergarten teacher in Philadelphia. My mom's from Puerto Rico. So she's worked in the city of Philadelphia in the Badlands with underprivileged families in the kindergarten. And it was crazy back then. She saw some crazy stuff, would bring kids home on the weekends whose parents didn't show up. That would fly today and still friendly and take care of, and very involved with some of those families and the kids that she stayed in touch with. So pretty cool. But yeah, my dad, I feel like dads these days are much different than dads at that time. The dad who came home, put their feet up on the recliner and took a nap and weren't really at the kitchen table for dinner. And the moms took care of all the cleaning and things like that. I feel like that's a big drastic change from me and my dad. Great dad, totally involved. There was at the sports games, everything like that. But I feel like the duties back then were very cut and dry.
Yeah.
How you take care of the cooking and cleaning, obligating the income even though you're working. So it was something a little bit different than what I was used to and what I think we're all as dads demanded from these days.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's a different world, a different environment. Whether one is good or one is bad doesn't really matter one way or another. I think whatever works for the couple, but yeah, it's definitely a different world. What would you say? You said that your dad was at sports games and stuff like that. What would you say were some of the biggest things that you loved and really wanted to pull from what your dad did as you were then becoming a father?
Dad was just a steady Eddie guy. He never got too high, never got too low, and I think that's a characteristic that I am. He let us be boys. He was never in our fate. I don't really remember him getting too angry or too upset. Like, obviously you have to sit down conversations in the times where you're disappointed or didn't do what you're supposed to. But I think my mom was more the emotional one. My dad was just steady Eddie right there whenever you needed it. Slap you around if you need to be checked. But yeah, sure. The most part is I take that from my dad, where I'm not too extreme. If there's a punishment and you're grounded for a week, it's just like, hey, let's figure this out. If it's something that you're going to lose your phone for a day or something like that, I totally get it, but it's never the extreme punishments.
Okay. Yeah, they're still today. You'll see some extreme punishments. I don't know. Sometimes you just walk through the mall and I'm shocked by what I see. And I'm like, if this is what you do in public, I can't imagine what happens inside your house. Whoa, boy. It's mind boggling to me. But there was something that was, go ahead.
That's a thing that I think actually from my mom that I picked up as being a kindergarten teacher. I feel like I've learned a lot from her of how to discipline and things like that. And I tell friends, my friends with newborn, like younger kids, just like the 2 points that she always told me was like, never paint yourself in a corner. Never be like the person who says, hey, if you don't do this, if you're at a party or something and you don't want to leave, but Jimmy, if you do this again, we're leaving. And of course you're not going to leave, but now you just break that shut. Like, so something like that. And then you just always have to follow through, because if you don't, then you know that what you're saying is the kids aren't going to have any respect for that. So there's the 2 points that my mom always said, and I feel like my parents led by, and I was like, okay, what they say goes, and there's no negotiating. It's just straight to that. You got to do what they say. And so that was something that, we see a lot of parents do that. And I think you cause issues down the road that I try to implement and get around right now.
I am super excited to finally have Matt Donnelly on. If you can, please go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us about your family and also your business.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on, Adam. Been looking forward to this call for a while since we got together in January and in Vermont there.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yes, I'm 42 years old. I am one of 5 kids, a fine Irish Catholic family. I'm married since 2012 to my beautiful wife, Kristen. We have 2 children, Mickey Matthew Donnelly, who is 10 years old, and Riley Catherine Donnelly, who is 9 years old. Pretty close to being Irish twins. They are 14 months apart.
Nice.
Yeah, I currently run a real estate sales team that services the Philadelphia suburbs and also a property management company. I got a 50-50 partner named Mike Soroka, who we've been business partners since 2014. Same year I had my first child.
Nice.
We're pretty much 50-50 on everything. We buy real estate, renovate, typically hold on to it, and then we get involved in some other passive income investments. We have ownership in a local restaurant as well, which works out great. He is also my ride or die. I see him more than I see my wife sometimes.
Yeah, he seems like a solid dude. I only met him in Vermont and hung out for a little while there. Other than that, I didn't really know him, but seems like a solid guy. You guys get along so super well. It's awesome to watch business partners who get along that well on personal time as well as business. So how long have you guys known each other?
So we met in, I want to say 2008. We were working at the same brokerage back then. I used to own a landscaping company. So I started a landscaping company freshman year of college. So graduated in 4 years with a degree in IT and a minor in business. And as you just found out about 5 minutes ago, I don't know about IT. I'm sorry. Crap about IT. So thank God I had the landscaping business to go on. So yeah, by the time I graduated, I had like 300 clients. Never really used my college degree. I ended up continuing the landscaping business, started bartending, got my real estate license in 2006. 2008, I came over to Coldwell Banker Preferred, a brokerage. There, Mike came over shortly thereafter. That's where we met. Sold my business in 2009. He found out I was selling my business and he asked me if I wanted to join his team. He had a 50-50 partner at that point in time, and that's where I first met him. And we got to work next to each other every day just grinding it out for about a year, and it worked out really good.
Nice. Yeah. The shifts in life, you never know where they're going to bring you. When they bring a solid partner that lasts for a while, you can't complain about that.
No, for sure.
So I want to rewind a little bit to your background, as I usually try to do, and just understand where you come from, what kind of background you have as far as your dad and maybe even your dad's dad. It's one of those things that I think that when we piece together, especially if you've already done the work on this, which I don't know if you have, to really understand who your dad was, to figure out, because as we're younger, I forget the stages they say you go through. You'd think I would have this down considering I have a dad podcast, but where it's basically like you're just like admiring your dad for the first like third of your life, and then the next third of your life, you're like you just don't like your dad at all. It's just you have disdain for him, and then you learn to respect him later on and understand where he came from, if you choose to do that part, right? Because we have to choose to look back at who our dads are to really get to what, for me, for example, because you may not know this much about me personally, like I felt like I was missing a lot from my dad, and then the more I learned about him, the more I realized like he never had those tools to be able to give me. Like I needed to do that work to understand. So long setup to just pass it over to you to tell me a little bit about your dad, what you learned from him, what you appreciated and what you didn't like, what you ran away from and what you ran towards from what you got from your dad.
Awesome. No, I appreciate it. I may break down in tears at some point talking about my dad.
Let's do it.
Yeah, he passed away in 2016, and he was like my best friend. So here we go. Now, like I said, I grew up one of five. We were lower middle class, certain points of time, getting help from the government if needed. My dad was a truck driver for John Wanamaker, so he drove the big 18-wheelers. Mm-hmm. My mom, for early portion of my life, was a stay-at-home mom, raising the five kids. Dad was a truck driver, big, strong guy. He blew out his back or whatever, had to retire from there. My mom ended up then going to college. My dad was staying at home recovering, ended up becoming like a maintenance man at the grade school that I went to, the elementary school. Since then, he was home a lot more. Since I was growing up, going into my preteen, teen years, he was around a lot for me and my group of friends, which was great. So had a really good relationship with him. He was a disciplinarian, but he was also told me all the time, how proud he would be of just anything I was doing. I told him.
No, it's absolutely understandable.
Talking. Anyways, that was awesome to him. A lot of dads just have a hard time expressing that, especially growing up in the time period that they grew up.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate to have a dad like that. And he was like a dad to my friends as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. My mom was the same for all of our friends. Like the amount of friends that we had that they come to our house and be like, "Hey mom, can I have?" And it was constant. Like my sister's friends would be constant inflow. Like she was the mom to everybody. So it was a wonderful thing to have that. So I would imagine the same thing on your side, having that from your dad. How much do you know about his upbringing, right? Because a lot of times the same thing goes. If your dad was missing tools from his upbringing, then he's going to have a hard time giving it to you unless he found it somewhere else, right? So what was his upbringing like?
So he was one of nine. His dad came over from Ireland when he was probably about 16 years old.
Okay.
And his dad was one of 18. So he didn't even get to meet half of his brothers and sisters in person or over the phone or whatever. But so my grandfather came over, met my grandma, bought a house in Kensington section of Philadelphia. A little tiny row home, 3-bedroom, 1 bath, 9 kids, 2 adults, 11 people living like that. So that's the environment that they grew up in. Every single person on my dad's side were just very hard workers. And I'm sure my grandfather was the same way. Curious. I just think about that. When they say you're going to an Irish wake, where they get that from was literally you're sending your child as a teenager over to America for a better opportunity, and you would never see them again, potentially. Yeah. So they would have a big goodbye. I mean, everyone's getting drunk, and that's the Irish wake. You're sending your family member over, you may never see them again. So that's where they actually get the term Irish wake from.
I never knew. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, because when your mom's grandparents were the ones who came over from Germany, and then my dad's side, I don't really honestly know a ton about my dad's side. That tells you a lot about my dad's side. We don't really know much, but so like you think about what our ancestors went through to travel from another country, especially in those times, like crossing over on a boat, trying to figure out how to do it, going through Ellis Island, understanding like just the amount of fortitude it took to say, you know what, we're just going to go do this. We're going to go make it happen. And who knows what's going to happen on the other side, but I know it's better for you. Go and do it. And
Yeah, we don't even want our kids to go 2 blocks away without.
Yeah, exactly. Don't even go across the street. Goodness gracious, they know. And I don't know. It's such a weird and distant thing for us to, even though it wasn't that long ago, for us to even think about something like that. But I saw one of the blessings of being in this country. Like, we don't have to think about whether or not we should go to a different country. I'm pretty sure we got it, like, as crazy as some things are here in 2020, we got it pretty good in the grand scheme of things. So.
That's what they wanted, right? They're going over there, maybe not necessarily for them to have a better life. Maybe their children know, but we're living that life that our grandparents, great-grandparents took that big risk and to come over here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's setting us up to be, again, sitting in the seat that we're sitting in. So absolutely. Without them taking that risk, what really makes, as I say that out loud, it makes me realize what risks am I avoiding that might be failing to set my kids up for a better future. If I'm failing to execute on something in business, or if I'm failing to take a risk that I think I shouldn't. Golly, man, I don't know why it just popped in my head as I'm saying this out loud.
Just to be a business owner and entrepreneur, we already took so many risks together. Like, we're doing it. Our grandparents, they're like, yeah, this is why we did it.
So walk me through what it was for you growing up, how you got to jumping into college, and what brought you down that path.
Sure. Yep. I'm number 4 in line of 5, right? So I was a little easier to sneak away, right? Get out of the pack a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
For young age, started working, selling lemonade, shoveling snow when it snowed out, cutting grass. I literally dressed up as Gumby in 8th grade for this cheesesteak shop that just opened up. And I walk up and down the avenue with a cheesesteak sign, and people throwing obscenities at me dressed as Gumby. But yeah, throughout high school, and I was cutting lawns, I was working at the cheesesteak shop, I was laying carpets, I was on the basketball team, I was playing sports track, football for a little bit. So just always super active and super busy. And our parents didn't really have money. So if I wanted something, I was like, it just always stuck out to me. Then I just go work and I don't have to ask them for things.
Yep.
I remember going into the refrigerator and opening up the refrigerator and just getting yelled at because I was wasting electricity. I'm like, just trying to find some food.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just from a young age, I started working, I started grinding, and it's how I'm wired as well.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, went to college and had the landscaping business, was taking classes, was still working at a cheesesteak shop. I was probably working like 5 jobs.
Yeah, that's not a while going to college. Like, what made you, from all the working that you were doing, were you one of the first to go to college? How did the college thing even come into your brain?
My oldest sister, Kelly, she went to LaSalle. That's where I ended up going. My brother, Sean, ended up going more of a tech school. My mother, Christine, she went to college. I went to college. My youngest sister went to college.
Okay.
This is what you were supposed to do, right? We had a pretty good financial aid package, so I didn't have to pay much to go, and I paid it myself, what was due.
Nice.
But looking back at it, obviously it's great to go to college and make those connections. I would say I would never want to lose those relationships, but I don't think college necessarily is a thing for everyone, and you don't have to go to it today, which I think is good.
Welcome to the BizDad podcast, and welcome back for you, Todd Dexheimer. If you can, go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us about your family, and tell us about your business, and we'll get rolling right in there from there.
We're just getting to know each other just a little bit better, so it's perfect, right? We had a good first conversation. We're going to have an amazing second conversation, so
love it.
Yeah, so a little bit about myself. We're based in the Twin Cities, Minnesota. Got 2 kids, a 15-year-old, 15-year-old girl, 11-year-old boy, and then my beautiful wife of 17 going on 18 years. I've got a real estate investment company is my business. So we buy mostly multifamily is our niche. We've got some assisted living. We own some retail, some industrial, but mostly multifamily is our niche. So we syndicate those deals, bring on passive investors, hold them. So that's my main business is doing that.
Let's rewind then a little bit. You said you've always had that drive and entrepreneurial spirit. Let's rewind a little bit and go back to when you were a kid. What was it like for you growing up? When did you start to taste that entrepreneurial bug? And maybe even what did your parents do? Who was your dad throughout all of this, throughout your growing up?
Yeah. So I'll start with my dad. Awesome, amazing man, Christian, like just good, conservative, loving, amazing dad, right? And middle class, worked his butt off, got up at 5 a.m. to go to work. I was the youngest of 6 kids, and my dad busted his butt. My mom stayed at home, but she even did odds and ends jobs to try to make ends meet. Money was never abundant. but it always was there enough to pay the bills. I know I can remember listening to my parents fight about money. I know that money was a struggle for them, but they made it work. We were probably lower middle class. I would call us just, again, good, hardworking. My dad was a grinder, and he was going to do everything he could to make sure the family was okay. And we didn't have a lot, but we didn't have a little either. Like we were never without. So that's my upbringing. I was the youngest of 6, so I didn't get new clothes. I got the hand-me-downs and the leftovers and things like that, but that's okay. Like it just is what it is. As far as an entrepreneur, when I was, I don't remember exactly how old, probably about the age of my son, 11 years old or so, I started a company and mowing lawns. And I did that with a neighbor friend of mine. We weren't very good at it. We didn't do a very good job. We had a couple of clients. We didn't make a lot of money, but it was our first foray into entrepreneurship. Then my dad worked for a manufacturing company, and we started Dex Custom Crates. And my brother and I were building shipping crates. And we were building shipping crates for his manufacturing company that was sending vices. So we were building these crates for his company, and we would literally sit in a driveway and cut plywood and build these crates and then send them off to the manufacturing company. So those were my early forays into business, and I always was trying to, sell stuff, and just always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I went to be a teacher out of college too, which is definitely not entrepreneurial.
No, not at all. Not in the slightest.
But even that, so I did my teaching. In the summers, I would work construction, but on the weekends and free time, I would do side jobs and construction side jobs. So again, I'm a little bit entrepreneurial. It wasn't a business, but I would still do side jobs and try to make money and just grind. I had that grinding mentality all the time.
So did your brother end up doing, you said you had your brother do it, the Dex Custom, what was it, Custom Crates?
Dex Custom Crates.
Did he stay in that realm as well? Is he an entrepreneur as well, or did he go nowhere near that?
Yeah, no, he is not an entrepreneur. In fact, probably one of the less entrepreneurial ones in my family. So it's funny because my dad, again, was a clock puncher, worked really hard, love him dearly. And I don't want to take away anything from him, so I'm not trying to bash what he did, but he was a clock puncher. That's just who he was. He doesn't have an entrepreneurial bone in his body. My mom, on the other hand, I never thought of her as an entrepreneur, but when I started putting things together, she's got that entrepreneur spirit. She just never harnessed it. And then when I look at my family, we've all done entrepreneurial things. My brother, the middle child, he owns a construction company. One of my sisters also owns a cabinet selling and construction company. Another one of my sisters, she works just a regular job, but she's done entrepreneurial endeavors. My oldest brother, he works a 9-to-5 as well, but he just flips houses here and there and wholesales houses. And so we've all have that entrepreneurial spirit. Some of us have taken a little farther than others.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think was the separator between you guys on who went that route and who didn't? Was just the luck of the draw, you think?
I think it's mindset, honestly.
Yeah.
I think it's mindset. Like my brother, he owns a really successful construction company, but it took him a long time to get that courage up to do that. And I think that's really what it was. It was just he worked jobs in the construction industry for years and years. And always worked for somebody else. And finally, I think he got fed up, and another guy in the company that was a sales guy got fed up, and they said, let's partner and start our own company. We can do this better. And so I think that was really what pushed him. My sister worked for me for quite a while. She was a stay-at-home mom. She was a teacher, then she was a stay-at-home mom, then she worked for me. And then eventually she started wholesaling these kitchen cabinets to me.
and then kept on rolling that. And it was like, I can do this. So I think it's just a mindset thing, getting out of your own way. And I really honestly think it's that.